Hello everyone, this is Fantasy Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
American Comics. Gwen has fallen for the ice fruit. Part 1. Beep, beep, beep. How Ren expressionlessly pulled his bank card out of the slightly old ATM. The string of startlingly long numbers that had just flashed on the screen was now branded into his mind, causing him to fall into a deep silence. To safely pocket this astronomical wealth, the effort he had put in behind the scenes was simply immeasurable. Especially recalling the verbal sparring at the negotiation table with those shrewd publishers, greedy agents, and Warner Brothers executives, he didn't know how many brain cells he'd burned to get it done. If the true source of this massive sum of money were unfortunately leaked, the entire United States would likely be turned upside down and explode in an instant. Who could have imagined that a wet behind-the-ears underage high school student was actually the ghostwriter behind a world-famous, hardcore sadomasochistic romance novel? If this news broke, the resulting tsunami of public opinion would definitely reach every corner of the globe. Now is not the best time to reveal the answer. At least not for now. Although I signed a non-disclosure agreement with Warner, capitalists might sacrifice me, the original author, to the heavens and proactively leak information to the media in the future to maximize profits. Since the huge royalties have already been safely pocketed, is it time to go have some fun at a high-end club? The corners of Hao Ren's mouth curled up slightly, tracing an intriguing arc. On the bustling street, several passing burly black men squinted their eyes, their gazes sweeping over him with ill intent. Hao Ren chose to directly ignore this provocative stare. After all, in broad daylight, he was holding a card, not bundles of US dollars, so he wasn't afraid of these street thugs acting out. First of all, his public identity was just an ordinary student attending the famous Midtown School of Science and Technology. Yes, that very cradle of many superheroes, especially that swing-loving Spider-Man who also goes to school here. In addition to that, he had a secret identity, a best-selling author. However, he didn't write something like Harry Potter or the fantasy romance of Twilight. Instead, he chose to plagiarize the only divine book he had ever read and which had left an indelible impression on him. For this book, he spent more than a year meticulously planning, finally achieving today's proud results while also completing the task assigned by the system. The name of this book was loud and full of temptation. 50 Shades of Grey. Since the film and television adaptation rights have been sold, according to the agreement, if Warner dares to breach the contract and leak my personal privacy, they have to obediently compensate me with a sky-high penalty of $100 million. Hao Ren tightened the straps of the backpack on his back and turned to walk toward the chaotic direction of Hell's Kitchen. System, stop playing dead. Hurry up and give me the mission settlement. Ding, detected the first stage mission. Collect 1 million desire points, judged as completed. Ding, detected the second stage mission. Accumulate 20 million US dollars in wealth, judged as successful. Given that the host extremely boldly chose the rolling mission accumulation mode and completed the targets exceptionally well, the original blue blind box and cyan blind box rewards will be merged and upgraded. The reward triggers a critical hit doubling mechanism. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a purple epic blind box. Special note. This system's reward levels are divided into white, blue, cyan, red, purple, gold, and black. Just the royalties from 50 Shades of Grey alone brought in 14 million US dollars after tax. Adding in the film, games, and subsequent novel shares, the total future after tax income will definitely exceed 30 million US dollars. However, for Hao Ren, making money was just a byproduct. His true core purpose was to use the dissemination of this book to frantically harvest the desire points needed for the missions. What kind of method was most efficient for collecting points? What could even make millions of people experience strong emotional fluctuations simultaneously, providing him with a continuous supply of energy? Was it hair-raising fear? Or was it blood-boiling anger? Or perhaps heartfelt joy? The answer was clearly humanity's most primal urge, romantical love. Hao Ren had initially chosen to bundle the first and second missions together without hesitation. According to the system's original settings, every time a single mission was completed, the corresponding reward could be claimed immediately. But there was also a hidden rule. If you didn't claim the reward after completing a mission and instead chose to let the mission keep rolling like a snowball, the difficulty would stack, and the final prize pool would double accordingly. This gameplay was like those exciting quiz shows on TV. Answer one question correctly, and you can choose to take the money and leave. But if you are brave enough to continue answering, the prize pool will get deeper and deeper until you win the final grand prize. The system on Hao Ren was clearly even better at playing, directly introducing a chain mission mechanism. As long as you keep grinding missions, although the difficulty will rise exponentially, the return at the final settlement will definitely be beyond imagination. Considering that the desire points and wealth missions were intrinsically linked in countless ways, Hao Ren dared to risk choosing the rolling mode. Of course, the risk was also great. If the second mission wasn't completed within the specified time, the rewards from the first mission would also vanish into thin air. Hao Ren put on his hoodie's cap, lowered his head, and like a fish, avoided the chaotic and noisy crowds on the street, quickly returning to an old apartment located in Hell's Kitchen. He skillfully took out his key to unlock the door. Before entering, he took a cautious look back at the dark corridor to ensure there were no tails following him before safely slipping inside. I need to find a time to move soon. Change to a better environment. This hellhole of Hell's Kitchen is simply not a place for humans to stay. Just then, a high-pitched soprano voice suddenly came from next door. The cries of, "Oh my God," made Hao Ren roll his eyes, his mind in a mess. "Bang bang bang tilde tilde tilde, can you keep it down for me?" Hearing the angry wall pounding and roaring complaints from the neighbor further down, Hao Ren couldn't help but laugh instead. Who could have imagined that Jessica Jones next door, who looked lean and fragile, actually hid the terrifying monstrous strength to punch through a car hood? When Hao Ren first came to rent in Hell's Kitchen and happened to meet that blind lawyer named Matt Murdock downstairs, he realized he had transmigrated into an extremely dangerous world. Wasn't this that Marvel universe where gods and demons dance wildly? Fortunately, by being neighbors with a vigilante like Daredevil, Hao Ren could barely sleep soundly in this crime-ridden Hell's Kitchen. But since discovering that the great Jessica Jones also lived on the same floor, Hao Ren's nerves had been constantly tense. Jessica Jones herself wasn't too scary. What he truly feared was the pervert who had once used superpowers to control and imprison this lady, forcing her to live a hellish life and constantly torturing her soul, Purple Man. If he ran into Purple Man now, with Hao Ren's current meager abilities, he wouldn't have any power to fight back at all. He'd probably become a puppet in the other's hands in minutes, doing whatever he was told. Purple Man, Zebediah Kilgrave, possessed an extremely eerie means of control. His entire body could emit a special pheromone hormone. Once others inhaled even a breath or were touched by his skin, they would instantly fall, being completely controlled by his words, similar to an irresistible powerful hypnosis. "Oh my God tilde 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 tilde." The high-pitched voice next door showed no sign of stopping, instead, it grew more intense. It seemed Jessica Jones had no intention of restraining herself because of the neighbor's anger. Instead, she seemed to be deliberately acting against them by cranking the volume to a new high. Hao Ren shook his head helplessly, having long since grown accustomed to it. "System, stop the nonsense. Open the blind box for me." For this moment, Hao Ren had already endured for far too long. Just after finishing junior high, he was forced by his parents to go abroad to study. The old house back home was sold off completely, and even his nationality was transferred to the USA. In fact, in his heart, Hao Ren was 100% unwilling. But he couldn't win against them and simply couldn't stop his parents' stubbornness. As a result, when Hao Ren was 16, his parents encountered a notorious $0 shopping incident at a supermarket and were shot dead on the spot by two black men. Even their wallets were stolen. And those two killers were still at large, living a comfortable life. But Hao Ren knew very well that those two guys were hiding in Hell's Kitchen and had joined that gang organization that specialized in selling flour. With his current weakling strength, let alone seeking revenge, just walking openly on the streets of Hell's Kitchen would make him a fat sheep for slaughter. Unless he was willing to go against his conscience and pretend to be a Korean or a Japanese devil, otherwise, here, Chinese people often only had the lot of being bullied. The Japanese gang power in Hell's Kitchen was enormous. Even that ferocious General Ross gang usually had to give the Japanese some face and didn't dare provoke them easily. But the situation for Chinese people was much more miserable. The largest Chinese organization here was actually a human trafficking gang. Hao Ren couldn't avoid such a scumbag organization fast enough, so how could he dare to ask for help? Please concentrate your thoughts to open the purple blind box. There are risks in opening blind boxes. Please bear all consequences yourself. A virtual box emitting a noble and mysterious purple aura floated out of thin air before Hao Ren's eyes. "Open it for me," Hao Ren muttered in his heart. As the command was given, the purple blind box opened accordingly. A strange fruit with skin covered in eerie twisted patterns and a blue-white color throughout lay quietly in the box. Hao Ren's pupils contracted violently in an instant, followed by the corners of his mouth starting to curl up frantically, and finally, he couldn't even control himself and laughed wildly. Devil fruit. It's actually a devil fruit. This time I've really struck it rich. He quickly covered his mouth tightly with his hand, trembling all over with excitement. Fortunately, those two black neighbors next door were being very helpful right now. Those high-pitched moans perfectly covered his movements over here. Congratulations to the host for having great luck in obtaining a top-tier Logia-type devil fruit from the Pirate King world. The ice fruit. Given the differences in world rules, sea stone factors do not exist in this world, and the original curse of fearing seawater for devil fruits will automatically become invalid. These words from the system almost made Hao Ren jump straight up from the floor. Ice fruit. Who didn't know about this thing? Who hadn't heard of it? That Marine Admiral Aokiji, with one move of Ice Age to freeze the sea. That scene was simply cooled to the extreme. In a daze, he seemed to see that tall man wearing a white suit and a lazy expression saying to him, "Hey, kid, come and inherit the will of D. Wait." Hao Ren shook his head violently, tossing this strange image out. That lazy guy, Marine Admiral Kuzan, didn't have any so-called will of D. He couldn't wait to reach his hand into the virtual blind box and grab that ice fruit. Without any hesitation, he took a big bite. It's actually sweet and refreshing, completely unlike that legendary taste of eating feces. The moment he swallowed the fruit, his body began to undergo a dramatic change. Hao Ren could clearly feel an instinctive reaction awakening within his body, as if he were born knowing how to wield the power of ice. He slowly extended his hand, and his 5 fingers rapidly crystallized at a speed visible to the naked eye, turning into translucent blocks of ice. That chill followed his palm, flowing with Hao Ren's will, and quickly spread throughout his entire body. Most miraculously, after his body elementalized, his 5 senses, such as sight and hearing, were not lost, but instead became sharper and clearer than ever before. The temperature inside the apartment began to plummet cliff-like. With him as the center, a thick layer of white frost rapidly spread in all directions. By the time Hao Ren snapped out of it, the goldfish bowl on the nearby table had been completely frozen into a solid block of ice. With a thought, he quickly withdrew the overflowing freezing power back into his body. He exhaled a long breath of cold air. My first attempt at elementalization, and I almost lost control and messed up. Hao Ren secretly assessed in his mind that if he had stopped just a bit later, this entire apartment building and even the surrounding Hell's Kitchen neighborhood might have been turned into an ice sculpture exhibition. This devil fruit produced by the system seems even more powerful than the original version. Since there are no side effects from the devil's curse, can I develop the power of this ice fruit to its absolute limit? At this moment, a semi-transparent data panel unfolded before his eyes. Name: Hao Ren. Wealth points, 44 million points, can be directly used for pay-to-win ability upgrades. Desire points, 2.3 million points, used to break through realm bottlenecks. Ability: Ice Fruit, entry level, skills. Mizong Fist, entry, 8 Extremes Fist, entry. Taskbar. 1. Ichisawa Kaori. Facing that special female superhero, you can try to develop an intimate relationship with her that goes beyond friendship. There will be unexpected and massive rewards then. Task reward. Blue blind box, can choose to stack and retain, task attribute. Independent long-term side mission. Detected that the host possesses a large amount of wealth points. Spend 10 million wealth points to directly upgrade the ice fruit ability to the proficient level? Looking at this prompt, Hao Ren's eyes instantly lit up like light bulbs. So fruit abilities could be leveled up with points just like in an online game. According to Hao Ren's own estimation, the bit of superficial knowledge he currently possessed would, at most, be at the level of a Navy captain in the Pirate King power system. But fortunately, this was a Logia-type elemental ability. In this world, unless he encountered a master of hockey or magic, physical attacks were basically useless against him. Therefore, the range between the floor and ceiling of this strength was incredibly vast. Of course, this was just Hao Ren's wishful thinking and couldn't be taken as fact. I knew these 2 chain missions weren't that simple, they were meant to pave the way for unlocking the system's attribute-based point allocation function. System, stop the nonsense. Deduct the money and upgrade my ice fruit ability. Hao Ren did not hesitate for a second. To him now, wealth points was nothing more than a string of cold numbers in a bank account. Only by converting it into actual combat power was it truly worthwhile. Hao Ren knew better than anyone just how dangerous the universe he lived in was. When that purple sweet potato essence, Thanos, snapped those deadly fingers, would he be unlucky enough to be among the 50% erased? Not to mention the various mutant freaks lurking in this world. His freezing ability was just too similar to that of Iceman, Robert Drake. And that Iceman was a genuine level 5 mutant, the legendary Omega level, with infinite potential. In comparison, that bald Professor X was only a level 4 alpha level mutant. Unfortunately, although Iceman's potential in the comics was heaven-defying, his demonstrated combat record was disappointingly lackluster. The only advantage the Ice Fruit gave Hao Ren was that it allowed him to skip the long practice period and quickly master the power of ice, with extremely strong early-stage explosive power. As for whether he could go head-to-head with an Omega-level mutant in the future, Hao Ren wasn't sure. But since he had a cheat in hand, it seemed he could develop this freezing ability to a level that surpassed the limits of the original Pirate King series. As Hao Ren confirmed the payment, a massive amount of techniques and experience regarding the use of freezing abilities flooded into his brain like a tide. At the same time, his body was strengthened in all aspects during this upgrade. His physical strength directly broke through the limits of ordinary humans and stepped into a transcendent domain. Congratulations, the Ice Fruit ability has been successfully upgraded to the proficient level. Continue to pay to win and use wealth points to upgrade the Ice Fruit ability? Keep upgrading. Hao Ren didn't even blink as he resolutely chose to keep throwing money at it. Spent 20 million wealth points. The Ice Fruit ability has leapt from the proficient level to the mastery level. Another library's worth of combat experience appeared in his mind. His physical fitness immediately surged once again. But Hao Ren remained clear-headed. This was only the first stage of fully mastering the Devil Fruit's abilities. In essence, the depth of his development of the freezing ability was still some distance away from the level of Admiral Aokiji. Admiral Aokiji's development of the fruit had definitely reached the awakening level, the so-called second stage, capable of permanently altering the environment and climate. To continue upgrading the freezing ability, 5 million desire points are required to break through the current bottleneck and enter the second stage of Devil Fruit ability, Awakening. Name: Hao Ren. Wealth points: 14 million points, insufficient balance. Desire points: 2.3 million points, significant gap. Ability: Ice Fruit. Mastery, Stage 1, Mizong Fist, Entry, 8 Extremes Fist, Entry. Fortunately, even though I sold the rights to 50 Shades of Grey, as the father of this book, I can still continuously harvest desire points from the readers. When the movie is made and released globally, my desire points will definitely see a terrifying explosion. Hao Ren muttered to himself. But he also understood in his heart that wanting to walk tall in the Marvel Universe relying solely on one Ice Fruit was pure dreaming. Unless he could infinitely add points like a cheat and stack his abilities to the heavens. But this clearly required massive amounts of wealth points and desire points as fuel. Hao Ren leaned back on the sofa, resting with his eyes closed, while his brain worked at high speed, contemplating his future plans. In his view, these so-called desire points were actually the same thing as the power of faith of gods mentioned in fantasy novels. The various emotions of joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness that people produce because of me, as long as they are strong enough, can be converted into my desire points. This is the Marvel era, a world where superheroes fly all over the place. Actually, to harvest desire points, there are two broad paths before me. Either become a villain everyone despises, or become a revered superhero. Be a hero? Hao Ren considered himself a common man and didn't have that noble sentiment of sacrifice and dedication at all. But when you possess power enough to break the balance, there will be countless greedy eyes in this world staring at you, wishing they could tear a piece of flesh from you to study. Unless he could build himself an invulnerable golden image. Either possess countless fanatical fans and supporters, making those in power wary of public backlash and afraid to touch you openly. Or use a notorious reputation to build a wall of fear, scaring anyone from having even the slightest designs on him. I am who I am, a firework of a different color. Only children make choices. I want both. I'm going to take it all. In Hao Ren's view, harvesting desire points from only one group of people was too small-minded and narrow-pathed. God created Jesus to harvest faith, but didn't he also allow Satan to harvest fear there? If I go all out now and freeze the entire New York City, would I instantly max out my desire points limit? A dangerous smile curled at the corner of Hao Ren's mouth. His current freezing ability was already quite terrifying. Once awakened, it could definitely replicate Admiral Aokiji's miracle of freezing the ocean. However, he had lived in New York for several years after all, and there were many acquaintances here. If he really froze New York and killed millions of people, it would only prove he was quite mentally deranged. Hao Ren felt that aside from being a bit greedy and lustful, he was generally a normal person. He had desires and ambition, but he wasn't so insane as to slaughter a city just for points. Moreover, the waters in Marvel were too deep, and there were existences he was wary of. For example, that Professor X's physical attacks were indeed ineffective against an elementalized person like him. But Professor X played with mind control, specializing in the brain. If that old bald guy directly invaded his consciousness, better to keep laying low and doing missions. Don't be too high profile for now. The moment of life and death is still far off. The snap crisis of that purple sweet potato essence was several years away. The figure of Admiral Aokiji surfaced in his mind again. The signature skills of Aokiji from the anime flashed through his head like a slideshow. Hao Ren tried to use his own ability to simulate and deduce them, and to his surprise, he soon perfectly replicated Aokiji's combat styles. This was the terrifying part of the ability upgrade. His control over the fruit's power had reached the point of doing as he pleased. Copying Admiral Aokiji's skills is simply not difficult at all, it's very smooth. At this time, the manga character that appeared in Hao Ren's mind was no longer Aokiji, but changed to another masterpiece known as a healing series, but was actually depressing. Akame ga Kill, General S. Death, who held the Ice Tigu, Demon's Extract. A recognized Super S-rank combat maniac in the anime world. The unique abilities she developed for her Tigu might just be the new direction for his future development of the Devil Fruit. Secret Technique 1. The Hapama. This move can directly freeze time and space, stopping everything except oneself. It's simply a bug-level divine skill. Although it consumes a lot and even S-Death can only use it once a day, it's enough to change one's fate against the heavens. Secret Technique 2. Ice Cavalry. Usually creating ice soldiers to store energy and releasing it all at once at a critical moment to create a super blizzard covering the entire empire, a definite map wiper. The core principle of S-Death's Ice Tigu was also creating and controlling ice. Compared to the ice fruit in Hao Ren's hand now, while one couldn't say they were 100% identical, there was at least an 80 to 90% similarity. Abilities are like a lump of plasticine. As long as your thinking doesn't backslide, there are always more solutions than problems. After manifesting them through imagination, you can mold them into whatever shape you want. 2 burning rays of light burst from Hao Ren's eyes. He understood in his heart that the upper limit of power might be hard to break through, but the breadth of the ability could be infinitely widened by using one's imagination. In this world, imagination was the sharpest blade. Morning, Jessica. The next morning, Hao Ren lazily greeted his neighbor in the hallway. Morning, Hao. Jessica replied listlessly, sporting 2 massive dark circles under her eyes. She looked completely drained, clearly exhausted by the energetic black neighbors next door. Looking at Jessica Jones in her terrible state, Hao Ren said seriously, "You look awful, Jessica. I think you really need to catch up on some sleep, but I can't help you, I have to rush to school." "Forget it," Jessica Jones said, shaking her groggy head. "Hao, take some advice from your big sister. You'd better move somewhere near the school. Don't waste your time in this hellhole. Hell's Kitchen isn't very friendly to a good student like you." Hao Ren gave a bitter smile. "I have no choice. Living here serves as a constant reminder not to forget my hatred. I must find the true culprit who shot my parents. Jessica, my offer still stands. As long as you can help me track them down, $5,000 is yours immediately." Although Jessica Jones was short on money and very tempted, she ultimately refused. "How? The clues you provided are too few. I even went to the police station to check, but the archive containing your parents' case was mysteriously burned in a fire a while ago. All the records were destroyed, and it's hard for me to investigate without any leads." In truth, Hao Ren understood that Jessica Jones meant well. She didn't want him to endlessly sink his hard-earned savings into the bottomless pit of revenge. In her eyes, Hao Ren was still that same boy. The one who, back then, had to plunge headfirst into the chaotic Hell's Kitchen to escape the relentless pursuit of those people from the orphanage. He even had to pay to be registered under a local family, going through the immense trouble of forging a pile of documents. Fortunately, those days of living in constant fear had finally come to an end. 18 years old, an adult. Those people from the welfare agencies could no longer tell him what to do. The sky was the limit, he could do whatever he wanted. More importantly, the culprit who killed his nominal parents had already been identified. That troublesome system task had also been completed along the way. He truly didn't want to stay in this wretched place for even one more day. Jessica Jones looked at the bulging envelope in her hand, completely stunned. Judging by the thickness, the amount of cash inside was definitely not small. "Miss Jones, don't think it's too much, this is what you deserve." Hao Ren explained casually as he saw her dazed expression. "The novel I wrote in my spare time over the last 2 years was published, and I've actually earned quite a bit in royalties." As for exactly what book he wrote, he kept his mouth tightly shut. If this strong woman knew the contents, she might find the money too hot to handle. Back when he first transmigrated to Hell's Kitchen and rented this dilapidated apartment, he had come specifically for Jessica. On his second day there, he had knocked on her door with a deposit, hiring her to investigate his parents' case. With Jessica Jones's connections and methods, uncovering the truth about his underage status was child's play. Knowing he was an orphan with a tragic past, this female detective had looked out for him like a protective big sister over the last 2 years. Without her silent deterrence, Hao Ren would have been swallowed whole long ago in this place where people are eaten alive. As Jessica Jones squeezed the envelope, an inexplicable sense of loss welled up in her heart. However, looking at the young man before her, she felt more happy for him than anything else. "Congratulations. Have you found a new place yet?" She forced a slight smile. "Give me a shout when you move. You know I'm strong, I can save you a lot on moving fees." The corners of Hao Ren's mouth curled up, revealing a row of white teeth. "I only have that little bit of junk, I can leave after school tomorrow. I've already got the keys to the new place, it's on Parklow Street." Jessica Jones's eyes instantly brightened a bit. "Parklow Street? That area is prime real estate?" The NYPD headquarters was situated right on that street. Its main entrance faced City Hall. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the safest vault in all of Manhattan. Compared to the chaotic and filthy Hell's Kitchen, it was practically heaven. Without Miss Jones's protection, a small guy like me has to find a safe house to lay low in. Hao Ren said half-jokingly. "The agent replied yesterday, saying they've secured a pretty amazing high-end apartment for me." He seemed to suddenly remember something interesting. "Oh right, I heard my new neighbor is also a police director." Jessica Jones couldn't help but laugh out loud. "It seems God is looking out for you, sending you another powerful bodyguard. I guess when luck comes, there's no stopping it." Hao Ren laughed and shrugged. "Good night, Hao, sweet dreams, Jessica." In the Monday classroom, the air was so stuffy it made one want to sleep. While the teacher on the podium was talking animatedly, Hao Ren didn't hear a single word. His eyes were glued to the K-line chart on his phone screen. Stark Industries' stock price was performing a high dive. In the wicked capitalist stock market, there was no such thing as price limits. Ever since that playboy Tony Stark returned alive, the stock price at Monday's opening had dropped like it had taken a laxative. Major institutions and retail investors were selling frantically, desperate to get out even if it meant taking a loss. In just 1 hour, the drop had reached a terrifying 40%. But Hao Ren knew clearly that this was far from the bottom. That old fox Obadiah Stane would definitely be adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes. He would even use the media to create panic and push the stock price even lower. Only then could he gobble up the shares at a low price and kick Tony Stark out of the game entirely. After all, the old man already knew that Tony had perfected the cold fusion reactor. How could one describe the value of such a thing? It was a super gold mine worth tens of trillions, or even hundreds of trillions of dollars. Black technology that would break the energy chains of humanity. In this Marvel universe where magic and gods flew across the sky, turning science fiction into reality was perfectly logical. For the next decade or two, Stark Industries stock will be the goose that lays the golden eggs. Compared to energy and artificial intelligence, the profits from selling weapons aren't even enough to get stuck between your teeth. Hao Ren calmly put away his phone. He had previously approached a broker for short selling, with a selling price of $12. His target price was below $6, he wouldn't close the net until it hit that point. The midday sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the school cafeteria floor. Hao Ren sat in a corner, mechanically chewing on the unpalatable food. Surrounding him were groups of students enjoying their meals while noisily gossiping about New York. Suddenly, a tall shadow blocked the light. Hao Ren stopped his chopsticks. He slowly looked up. He usually kept a low profile and never looked for trouble. But in this so-called elite school, even if you didn't look for trouble, trouble would find you. Especially for an honest person who looked easy to bully, they were practically a natural target for school bullying. Not to mention he was a high-achieving ethnic Chinese, making him even more out of place in this gathering of rich kids. "Yo, Fletcher." Hao Ren greeted him expressionlessly. Fletcher's face was full of fat, and a playful, cold sneer hung on the corner of his mouth. "How, have you heard? That kid Zhao Meng kicked the bucket?" Hao Ren was slightly stunned, his eyes flickering. That was the big brother he had recognized at school, though he had already graduated. He hadn't expected the next news he heard would be of his death. To avoid being bullied, he had paid $100 a month and even helped the guy write his homework and essays. He had heard his father was a figure in Chinatown's The Triads. Is that so? A flash of regret crossed Hao Ren's eyes. Regardless, Zhao Meng had followed the Zhonghu Code of Ethics by providing protection for the money received. When he was around, Fletcher and his bunch of fools indeed hadn't dared to come looking for trouble. Hao Ren lowered his head again, picking up his spoon to continue eating. Bang! With a loud crash, the food tray was flipped directly onto the ground. Soup splattered everywhere, and mashed potatoes were smeared all over the floor. "You yellow monkey, who allowed you to eat at a table?" Fletcher laughed with a twisted expression, full of petty triumph. "Get on the ground and eat, don't leave a single bit." Such good free mashed potatoes and pork hock. Wasting it would be to suffer divine punishment. Hao Ren remained seated steadily, not even lifting an eyelid. A rough, large hand suddenly grabbed the back of his neck, pressing down hard toward the floor. "Can't you understand human speech? Put that filthy mouth of yours to the floor and lick it clean." Fletcher roared like a mad dog. The lackeys nearby crossed their arms, letting out bursts of piercing laughter. A scene from a movie suddenly flashed through Hao Ren's mind. The little fat kid who was bullied. He hadn't expected that today it would be his turn to be the lead in such a cliché plot. He sighed helplessly in his heart. Click. Although it was noisy, Hao Ren still caught the faint sound of a shudder. He turned his head slightly. "Peter Parker." "Fletcher. Stop, you shouldn't bully your classmates like this." Peter Parker shouted while holding up his camera. What a truly good person with an overflowing sense of justice. "But buddy, what's with the photo taking at a time like this?" "Peter, make me look cool, or I'll beat you up too." Fletcher threatened arrogantly. Hao Ren's neck was as stiff as iron, his body remaining motionless. His gaze was deep as he scanned the surrounding crowd. He had originally thought someone righteous would step forward. Instead, those classmates had all gathered around, each with an expression like they were watching a show. The last bit of warmth in his heart instantly cooled. Good, now he could see these people's true faces clearly. "Fletcher, enough. Let him go." Gwen Stacy pushed through the crowd and walked over angrily. "I am absolutely not going to accept your prom invitation. The way you're acting right now is just like a disgusting thug." Her delicate face and long golden hair looked exceptionally dazzling in the sunlight. "HMPH, Gwen, you'll regret this. Just you wait." Seeing the goddess angry, Fletcher could only give Hao Ren a hard shove. He then retreated with his lackeys, cursing and swearing. After all, Gwen's father was the police director George Stacy. He had to give him that much face. "Are you okay?" Gwen Stacy asked with concern. "What a pity, now I'll have to go to class on an empty stomach." Hao Ren looked at the food on the ground, his tone frighteningly calm. "Hey, don't take it to heart, but classmate, you should have fought back just now." Gwen Stacy blinked her beautiful large eyes at him. "Gwen, thanks." Hao Ren smiled nonchalantly. "You're welcome. If you really want to thank me, try coming in second on the next exam for once so I can enjoy the top spot." Gwen Stacy made a joke. "Sure thing, Miss Gwen, the perpetual second placer." HMPH. Gwen Stacy's eyes widened cutely. Hao Ren shoved his hands into his pockets and leisurely walked toward the restroom. AI model. GEMINI 3.1 flashlight. He knew that Fletcher and his gang were definitely hiding there, smoking and celebrating. Walking to the door, Hao Ren stopped in his tracks. Ahem. He coughed lightly twice. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a chill. The four people inside, who were puffing away on their cigarettes, immediately turned their heads. I can even give you a two-hand handicap. Hao Ren tilted his head, a wicked and arrogant smile appearing on his face. You yellow-skinned monkey, you're courting death. Fletcher threw away his cigarette butt and rushed over. Hao Ren's footwork shifted in an uncanny way. Although his Mizong fist was only at the introductory level, it was more than enough to deal with these high school students. As their figures crossed, only a few muffled thuds could be heard. One kick for each, clean and swift. The few who had been so arrogant just a moment ago were instantly lying on the ground, wailing. A groaning Fletcher looked in terror at the approaching Hao Ren. Fletcher, what did you call me just now? Hao Ren slowly squatted down. One hand suddenly grabbed Fletcher's hair, dragging him up like a dead dog. Ouch, ouch, ouch. It's breaking, Fletcher shrieked like a slaughtered pig. What did you tell me to eat just now? Hao Ren's tone grew colder and colder, as if it came from the depths of hell. Ignoring Fletcher's struggles and pleas for mercy, he pressed his head down and slammed it hard into the toilet bowl. Glug, glug, glug. Amidst that suffocating sound of water, the world finally became quiet. Wow, is this big guy yours? Jessica Jones circled that shiny black Lincoln Navigator. The exaggerated size and imposing appearance made her give a thumbs up. Confess, what kind of money-grabbing business are you actually in? The curiosity in Jessica Jones's eyes was about to overflow. No, I should ask, what is the name of that crappy novel you wrote? She had just realized that this kid said he bought the car with his royalties. Hao Ren scanned the area around the parking lot vigilantly. A few black thugs were staring at them with malicious intent. If it weren't for Jessica, that fierce star, being present, these guys would have come up to borrow money long ago. Get in the car first, this isn't the place to talk. Hao Ren opened the car door and smiled. Jessica Jones didn't stand on ceremony and hopped straight into the passenger seat. My curiosity is about to explode now. What kind of book can make so much money? In just a few short days, the financial power Hao Ren had displayed was simply jaw-dropping. Hao Ren leaned over and whispered a book title in her ear. Jessica Jones's signature smoky eyes instantly widened like copper bells. That expression clearly said, "Are you kidding me? Wait, you're just barely an adult, right? You're saying you're the author of 50 Shades of Grey. How did you write those kinds of scenes?" Jessica Jones felt her worldview had been severely shaken. Shush, keep it low-key. If this gets out, I won't be able to live a peaceful life. Hao Ren made a gesture for silence. Tisk, tisk, tisk. I really couldn't tell, you're actually this kind of freak genius. If this news broke to the media, the entire USA, no, the whole world, would explode. Jessica Jones laughed until she shook, imagining the expressions of the media when they discovered the author was an 18-year-old Chinese-American boy. However, although she seemed carefree, she was very tight-lipped. After all, she was an extraordinary hero herself, mixing in Hell's Kitchen. Possessing strength far beyond that of an ordinary person. Aren't you afraid your agent or lawyer will sell you out? Jessica Jones suddenly stopped smiling and asked. Hao Ren gripped the steering wheel confidently. My lawyer is a blind man, and besides, I also have a little secret of his in my hands. Jessica Jones raised an eyebrow, seemingly guessing something. Matt, that famous blind lawyer from Hell's Kitchen was certainly no pushover? Hao Ren smiled without a word, which counted as an admission. The black Lincoln drove steadily toward the high-end apartment district on Park Row. The real estate agent, Julia, had long been waiting at the entrance, dressed in a tight professional suit. That hot figure made passing men turn their heads repeatedly. Mr. Hao, the transfer procedures are all completed. You can move in at any time. Thank you for your hard work, Miss Julia. Hao Ren smiled and took the keys. Julia took the opportunity to lightly scratch his palm with her finger, threw him a flirtatious wink, and then swayed her hips as she left. Jessica Jones saw it all clearly from the side and couldn't help but tease. Looks like I'm a big third wheel, ruining your fun. Hao Ren shrugged indifferently. You know, I'm a legal adult now. Jessica Jones was dazed for a moment. She used to always treat him as a little brat who needed protection. That scene just now made her realize that this kid was already a real man. Although his face still carried a hint of childishness, that composed temperament was even more sophisticated than a social elite. It's already dark. I had Julia prepare ingredients in advance. Tonight, I'll show off my skills and treat you to a taste. Hao Ren turned his head to look at Jessica, who was still a bit stunned. The woman in front of him, although dressed in a decadent style, had a unique charm that was truly captivating. Black hair, snow-white skin, big, bright eyes under smoky makeup, a high nose bridge, and a cherry mouth. Except for that 1.75-meter height which felt a bit imposing, she completely conformed to Eastern aesthetic standards. And she was practically carved from the same mold as that American TV actress, Kristen Ritter. Sure, then I'll wait to taste your cooking. Jessica Jones smiled faintly. The thought from that moment was forcibly suppressed by her. What are you thinking? An old cow eating tender grass? She hadn't even cleaned up her own mess yet. The two carried their luggage into the elevator. The main labor was, of course, Jessica. After all, she was a superhuman, and this weight was about the same as holding a feather. The two understood this tacitly. Having known each other for over 2 years, they had long become best buddies. The apartment was on the top floor, a duplex structure, and even came with a huge open-air balcony. Jessica Jones was shocked the moment she entered. The view is amazing, and this interior design taste is on point. That low-key luxurious style, compared to that dog kennel in Hell's Kitchen, was simply like heaven versus earth. The original owner was a Wall Street broker. He put a lot of effort into this house. Hao Ren walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the city's night view. It's a pity that this unlucky guy embezzled public funds to bottom-fish Stark Industries, and ended up losing everything down to his underwear. I thought this deal would fall through when Tony Stark returned. After all, the stock went up a bit on Friday. Speaking of this, Hao Ren smiled very brightly. Jessica Jones pursed her lips. Then he probably feels like jumping off a building today. I heard Stark Industries plummeted by 40%. That willful billionaire Tony really screwed over the investors. So this guy desperately needed cash to fill the hole, and I reluctantly took over. Hao Ren poured a glass of water and handed it over. Drink some water to moisten your throat first. Give me some time, and I'll pan-fry some top-grade Wagyu beef for you later. Jessica Jones's eyes lit up. I thought you were going to make Chinese food like General Tso's chicken. Chinese food is too time-consuming, it's too late today. Hao Ren said while rolling up his sleeves. There will be plenty of opportunities later. You're welcome to come over for a free meal anytime. Tonight is a housewarming feast. I can't let a great beauty wait too long on an empty stomach. Watching the back busy in the kitchen, Jessica Jones was actually a bit distracted. How is this like a high school student? He is clearly a good family man. Hao Ren took out that piece of snowflake beef with beautiful marbling from the refrigerator. This was also top-grade stuff he entrusted Julia to buy, costing quite a few bucks. He originally wanted to prepare a Manchu Han imperial feast to celebrate the housewarming. But he couldn't expect that foreign agent to go to a Chinese market to buy seasonings. He could only make do with a Western meal. The steak sizzled in the pan, and the aroma wafted everywhere. Hao Ren fished a bottle of red wine out of the wine cabinet. A 1991 Harlan. This is the peak work of that winery. The original owner left in a hurry and left this good stuff for me. It's perfect for celebrating that I can legally drink now. Under the lights, his handsome profile carried a warm smile. Jessica Jones propped up her chin, her eyes a bit hazy. As long as you don't go out on the street and act drunk, I can't be bothered to care whether you're 21 or not. In this bizarre country, the drinking age is more strictly regulated than guns. This is my home. Heaven knows, earth knows, you know, and I know. Hao Ren raised his glass, his smile charming enough to be against the rules. The morning sun was a bit blinding. Jessica Jones stretched, her whole body aching as if she had fought the Hulk. The unfamiliar ceiling made her brain freeze for a second. Immediately after, those crazy memory fragments from last night surged in like a tide. Hangover, red wine, that kiss that was even more intense than the red wine. She covered her face abruptly and let out a groan of annoyance. However, truth be told, that kid's stamina was really good. Ever since getting rid of the purple man's nightmare, she had become an alcoholic, and this kind of blackout situation wasn't the first time. She lifted the quilt and picked up the clothes scattered on the floor to put them on. After taking a shower, she came out, wanting to find some ice water to drink. As a result, she saw a sticky note on the refrigerator. I prepared some sour plum drink for your hangover. It's in the fridge. Breakfast is on the table. Remember to heat it up before eating. How? Sour plum drink? What the hell is that? She opened the fridge and immediately saw that cup of purple-black juice. Holding a skeptical attitude, she gulped down a big mouthful. The cold, sweet and sour liquid slid down her throat, and that nauseating hangover feeling miraculously eased. Delicious. Walking to the dining table, looking at the table that had served as a battlefield last night, Jessica couldn't help but blush. On the table were hot porridge, side dishes, and even exquisite sandwiches. This kid clearly didn't have so much stuff in the fridge last night. He still has to go to high school. Jessica Jones scratched her head frantically. She had actually laid a hand on a high school student. Fortunately, he was an adult, otherwise she would have ended up in prison for life. At this moment, Hao Ren was driving, humming a tune on his way to school. The experience last night was simply indescribable. As expected of a superhuman body, that resilience was simply invincible. If he hadn't eaten the ice fruit and had such an outrageous physique, he might not have been able to subdue this wild horse. Fortunately, he had the wit to use his elemental transformation to switch forms, completely eliminating all his fatigue and bruising. Otherwise, he would definitely have had to lean against the wall to walk today. He had originally planned to visit his neighbor, the director's family, on his first day of moving in. But he ended up being intercepted by Jessica. However, this could be considered fulfilling a dream he'd had since his transmigration 2 years ago. That wish list item to take down Jessica Jones could finally be checked off. The system's independent mission also showed as completed. Ichisawa Kaori mission settlement. Established a relationship beyond friendship with a special heroine. Reward, blue blind box. Open the blind box. Hao Ren commanded with a thought. Congratulations host, you have obtained the passive skill. Mind immunity. Mind immunity. Ignore all telepathy, mind control, and consciousness intrusion. Hao Ren was so excited he almost floored the accelerator. This is a god-tier skill. Who knows when that bald guy in the wheelchair might decide to scan the entire globe on a whim. If he saw Hao Ren's memories as a transmigrator, that bald guy might get some twisted ideas. Then there's Apocalypse, who wants to melt down and rebuild the Earth. With this passive, those mind-playing mutants are nothing but little brothers in front of him. Combined with the physical immunity of the ice fruit, physical attacks are ineffective, and mental attacks are ineffective. It seems only Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One and that Wanda, who might go crazy, can handle me now. Could it be that my nemesis are all women? Hao Ren shook his head with a bitter smile. The car slowly drove through the gates of Star City High School. The feng shui of this school was truly something. It practically mass-produced Spider-Man. Just as he walked up to his locker, he saw an ugly monkey drawn on the door. Hao Ren gave a cold laugh. It seems yesterday's toilet water wasn't enough of a fill for them. His gaze instantly became as sharp as a blade. The surrounding students were pointing and whispering. He acted as if he didn't see them, calmly taking out his textbooks and turning toward the classroom. They thought this childish isolation and mockery could knock him down, purely a pipe dream. Anger is the expression of the incompetent. He preferred to be like a venomous snake, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike with a lethal blow. How, are you okay? Hannah approached, looking at him with a face full of concern. Hannah, do you think I should be shouting in the street like a shrew? Hao Ren looked at the kind girl and gave a gentle smile. No, but this is too much bullying. It's racial discrimination. You should go tell the principal. Hannah waved her small fist indignantly. Hao Ren shook his head. Don't worry, someone will help me lick it clean. Telling the teacher? That's something only a 3-year-old would do. As soon as the bell rang, Fletcher sneakily slipped into the restroom. After confirming no one was following him, he breathed a sigh of relief and prepared to relieve himself. He was truly traumatized from yesterday. He didn't even dare use the bathroom at home. Fletcher. A familiar voice rang out from behind. Hao Ren stood with his arms crossed, looking at the midstream Fletcher with a smile. Fletcher shuddered all over, nearly peeing himself. Hao Ren glanced at the system panel and found that the option had turned gray. No matter how he poked it, there was no response. This meant that his resistance bar for mind immunity was completely maxed out, reaching an unshakable state of absolute defense. At this moment, any mental attack directed at him was as ineffective as an inch. As for the Mizon fist and 8 extremes fist in that column, Hao Ren had only picked them up to practice for self-defense after transmigrating. They had nothing to do with the original owner's weak body. Mizon fist was an ancestral craft of the Hao family, while 8 extremes fist was something he specifically went to learn from a descendant of the Wu family in Kongzhou, Hebei. Since transmigrating to this world 2 years ago, relying on the solid foundation he built in his past life, Hao Ren had put a lot of hard work into traditional martial arts. This allowed him to remain steady even if he faced thugs empty-handed. Mizong fist, also known by Zhonghu people as Yanqing fist, is performed with the lightness of a swallow. The moves are fancy and ever-changing, primarily designed to leave the opponent bewildered. 8 Extremes fist followed a completely different path, emphasizing fierce violence and simple, unadorned movements, but a single hit would result in broken bones and torn tendons. After the system's strengthening and modification, my current physical fitness is definitely much more perverse than those so-called traditional martial arts grandmasters. This is my capital for establishing a foothold in this dangerous world. After all, I'm from China. Isn't it perfectly reasonable for a Chinese person to know a bit of kung fu these days? But this world is full of malice toward mutants. It's practically driving people to a dead end. If my ice fruit ability is exposed, those US agents will definitely pounce like sharks smelling blood, dragging me into a lab for slice and dice research. Even if he was lucky enough not to be locked in a cage, Hao Ren didn't want to live a life where every meal and sleep was watched by surveillance cameras. That would be more painful than death. He yearned for freedom, not to be a captive lab rat. I'll grind these 2 martial arts to their limit first. Not only will it enrich my offensive methods, but it will also broaden my tactical vision. I won't just be throwing ice cubes in future fights. Thinking of this, Hao Ren didn't hesitate and directly chose to upgrade his skills with a wave of his hand. Ding! Consumed 100,000 desire points. Your Mizong fist has broken through its bottleneck, soaring from entry level directly to transcendent rankings. Entry, minor achievement, major achievement, peak, transcendent. Ding! Consumed 150,000 desire points. Your 8 Extremes fist has been promoted from entry level to transcendent. According to the martial arts realm divisions, entry to major achievement trains obvious Jin, peak level trains hidden Jin, and at the transcendent level, one plays with the superb transformative Jin. As his skill levels rose, Hao Ren felt a surge of heat within his body. His already strengthened physique underwent a second development. This feeling of becoming stronger was very direct. His physical fitness had surged by at least another 60% on its original basis. Both boxing styles reaching transcendent meant that the power throughout his body was now fully connected. He could switch between obvious and hidden Jin at will, and any part of his body could instantly erupt with lethal force. Even more exaggerated was his already keen 5 senses, which were now ridiculously strong. The moment the power saturated his entire body, he even developed a mysterious premonition of sensing the cicada before the autumn wind moves. Not even the sound of a fly flapping its wings within several meters could escape his ears. The current Hao Ren had absolute confidence that even without using his ice fruit ability, he could rely on these fists alone to grind Daredevil, who jumps on rooftops all day, into the dirt, or even go toe-to-toe with that massive underworld emperor of Hell's Kitchen, Kingpin. Detected that both boxing skills have reached the transcendent state. Would you like to consume desire points for fusion and deduction? Hao Ren was still immersed in the pleasure of his surging power. Hearing the system prompt, he subconsciously responded in his mind. Fuse. I must fuse, consuming 40,000 desire points for fusion. Fusion successful. Congratulations host, you have obtained a new skill, Baji Mizong Fist. This new set of boxing techniques perfectly combined the advantages of both, the fierce violence of 8 Extremes and the agility of Mizong. It combined hardness and softness, becoming unpredictable. The brand new Baji Mizong Fist was at the transcendent level right out of the box. Although his pure strength value didn't increase again, his actual combat power underwent a terrifying qualitative change where 1 + 1 was greater than 2. Most importantly, he felt a long, continuous breath within him. Having trained internal boxing to the transcendent level, his physical strength was like a great river, flowing endlessly. He simply didn't know the meaning of the word tired. This leap in physical stamina also made his control over the ice fruit ability more proficient, greatly enhancing his endurance. With a thought, Hao Ren called up his personal attribute panel. Name: Hao Ren. Wealth points: 483.75 million points. This is mainly used to improve various abilities. Desire points: 2.34 million points. This is the key resource for breaking through realms. Abilities: Ice Fruit, currently in the first stage of mastery, Mind Immunity, passive skill, max level. Skills: Baji Mizong Fist, Transcendent, current mission list. 1. Ichisawa Kaori. If you can show your charm in front of that special heroine and develop a wonderful relationship beyond friendship, you will receive unexpectedly rich rewards. Mission reward: Blue Blind Box, stackable. Attribute. Independent branch, infinite loop mission. 2. Seize Peter Parker's opportunity and personally facilitate the birth of Spider-Woman. Mission rank. Blue. Mode. Rolling update. Please wait a moment tilde. While Hao Ren was still studying the system, the rapid sound of high heels tapping on the floor approached. He expressionlessly pressed the elevator's close button. However, that beautiful figure moved quite fast, squeezing in just a second before the elevator doors completely closed. Phew. Thank you. Gwen Stacy looked up, panting, to give her thanks, but when she saw who was in the elevator, the sweet smile on her face instantly froze, and her beautiful eyes were filled with surprise. Hao Ren, what are you doing here? Hao Ren only gave her a cold, aloof glance, as if looking at a stranger, and then reached out to press the button for the basement level. Seeing how cold he was, Gwen Stacy pouted slightly, feeling aggrieved. She figured he must be holding a grudge because of her lecture yesterday. She took a large step to the right in a huff, her back pressed tightly against the elevator wall, her eyes fixed on the lights on the ceiling, putting on an air of, "This lady doesn't want to talk to you either." However, the curiosity in her heart was like a cat scratching, making her unable to resist stealing glances at the tall boy beside her. Hao Ren actually appeared on the same floor of her apartment building. This was simply unbelievable. You should know that there were only 2 households on the top floor of this apartment building. Right, her mom seemed to have mentioned something a few days ago, saying that Mr. Smith next door had sold his place. At the time, she was wondering what kind of weirdo the new neighbor would be. Because they hadn't met, she even asked her dad, Police Director George Stacy, to check his background. But Director George Stacy had been so busy lately that he hadn't gotten around to it. This was a high-end apartment in Manhattan. The new neighbor hadn't rented, they had bought the entire place outright from Mr. Smith. Someone with that kind of financial power didn't look like an ordinary Asian high school student no matter how you looked at it. Gwen Stacy racked her brain, trying to recall everything about Hao Ren. This classmate was usually a nobody at school. The only time he'd made a high-profile appearance was when the last exam results came out. His score was actually a notch higher than hers, the top student. Aside from his good grades, he was usually so low-key he was like a shadow. Gwen Stacy had only heard gossip from her best friend Hannah that Hao Ren's background was quite tragic, as his parents had unfortunately been killed in a shooting 2 years ago. Supposedly, he was staying at a distant relative's house, somewhere like Chinatown. But Gwen Stacy clearly remembered running into him several times on the subway. Judging by the direction, he should actually be living in the chaotic Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen was a notorious den of vice in Manhattan. Gwen Stacy felt a chill run down her spine just hearing the name. Even though her father, George Stacy, was the head of the NYPD, he couldn't guarantee her safety in a godforsaken place like that. The question now was, how did a poor student living in Hell's Kitchen suddenly transform and move into a top-tier luxury apartment? And it just so happened to be right next door to her. Was it a coincidence or premeditated? Where did that massive sum of money for the apartment come from? At this moment, Gwen Stacy suddenly realized that, just as Hao Ren had said yesterday, she knew absolutely nothing about him. Ding! The elevator emitted a crisp chime. They had reached the second basement floor. Hao Ren stepped out of the elevator with his long legs. With his back to Gwen, the corners of his mouth curled into an imperceptible arc. He had intentionally provoked Gwen Stacy with his words yesterday. He was actually playing a psychological game. His subtext was constantly hinting, "Classmate Gwen, do you think you know me well? In fact, what you see is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to know the truth, come and explore me." If she had her usual mild temperament, Gwen would have at most muttered a few words to herself and forgotten about it later. But this unexpected reunion in a private, high-end residential area had directly ignited Gwen Stacy's curiosity. The seed of suggestion he had planted in her heart yesterday had now begun to take root and sprout, growing into a towering tree. Deliberately acting cold in the elevator just now was not only to maintain a sense of mystery but, more importantly, to make this girl's mind race, making her unable to stop herself from wildly imagining all sorts of scenarios. Although Hao Ren didn't look back, he could feel Gwen's burning gaze stuck to his back. He estimated her mental CPU was about to burn out. That was exactly right. Although the two were classmates, their past interactions were cleaner than a blank sheet of paper. Now, this girl Gwen had clearly taken the bait. Next, she would definitely find ways to get close to him in an attempt to peel back this veil. Hao Ren felt a secret thrill. When a woman starts to develop a strong curiosity about a man, It's the beginning of her falling for him. What was this tactic called again? Oh right, it's called playing hard to get. High-end hunters often appear in the form of prey. Classmate how? Wait for me. Gwen Stacy looked at the B2 indicator light on the elevator display, feeling a bit dazed. This was the parking garage. But she couldn't care about that anymore. She chased after him, her high heels clicking, and called out to Hao Ren's back. Hao Ren stopped but didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he raised his wrist to check his exquisite mechanical watch and said in a flat tone, "Classmate Gwen, if you don't hurry back to the first floor to catch the bus, I'm afraid your perfect attendance award for today will be ruined." It would have been fine if he hadn't mentioned transportation, but as soon as he did, the anger in Gwen Stacy's heart flared up. The disaster yesterday afternoon had caused her to be splashed with mud from a puddle by the roadside. She didn't know how many strange looks she had endured from passers-by on her way home. HMPH, classmate Hao Ren, don't you think you should apologize to me for your terrible behavior yesterday afternoon? Gwen Stacy crossed her arms over her chest, compressing her already impressive figure to be even more pronounced. Her huffy appearance actually carried an inviting cuteness. It had to be said that compared to Gwen in this regard, that tomboy Jessica Jones was simply being outclassed in every way. If you're referring to that matter regarding classmate Fletcher, then I'm sorry. I've always been a blunt person. I don't feel I did anything wrong, nor do I feel I said anything wrong. Hao Ren shrugged with a look of indifference. Gwen Stacy stomped her foot in frustration. No, I'm not talking about that at all. That's your private business. You're right, I shouldn't have meddled. I'm talking about yesterday after school, when you drove past me and splashed dirty water all over me. Classmate Hannah was there too, she can testify. A perfectly timed look of astonishment appeared on Hao Ren's face. There was such a thing? If it's true, then I must apologize to you. That was my oversight. Seeing Hao Ren finally bow his head and admit his mistake, Gwen Stacy lifted her chin proudly like a victorious little rooster. HMPH, is a single apology all I get? Do you know how I got home yesterday? Everyone was laughing at me. It seems I was indeed a bit reckless with my driving yesterday and caused you suffering. How about this? To make up for your wounded spirit, I'll treat you to a big meal. Will that do? Hao Ren was sincere this time. After all, he really hadn't noticed the puddle by the road yesterday. Hearing this, the resentment in Gwen Stacy's heart instantly dissipated by more than half. She thought to herself that since she was so naturally beautiful, no man could truly harden his heart and keep a cold face forever. Besides, since they had become neighbors and she wanted to dig out his secrets so badly, she had to have this meal. I'll remember the meal. But as interest, I'm hitching a ride in your car to school today, and you're responsible for driving me home after school. Gwen Stacy's eyes darted around as she proposed her conditions. You're going that way anyway, classmate Hao. You wouldn't refuse such a small request, would you? Fine. Just this once, not to be repeated. Hao Ren took out his car key from his pocket and pressed it. Not far away, a black Lincoln Navigator lit up its headlights and made an unlocking sound. Just today? What a stingy guy. Gwen Stacy was still muttering, but she was already blooming with joy inside. She walked over with light steps, unceremoniously pulled open the passenger door, and sat inside. Soothing pop music flowed through the cabin. Other than that, neither of them spoke, making the atmosphere a bit subtle. Hao Ren was intentionally ignoring her to continue maintaining his persona. As for Gwen Stacy, she didn't know which topic to start with for a moment. The man acting as the driver beside her was, in her eyes, a textbook example of a straight man. He really doesn't understand romance at all. HMPH, I'm starting to regret agreeing to eat with him. The car drove smoothly all the way and soon arrived at the school gates. Only when the car came to a steady stop did Hao Ren speak, his words as precious as gold. After school, I'll still park here to wait for you. Gwen Stacy gave Hao Ren an annoyed look. This man was simply a block of wood. Classmate Hao, you are really boring. After saying that, she slammed the car door hard with a loud bang. This commotion immediately drew the attention of countless surrounding students. Wait, who is that man getting out of the driver's seat? Is that Hao Ren? Heavens! Who gave him the courage to try and pick up our commoner school beauty? After confirming that the person getting out of the car was indeed Hao Ren, the surroundings instantly exploded into a frenzy of gossip and discussion. When did these two get together? As they chatted, some students even thought of names for their future children. The gossip queen, Hannah, appeared behind Hao Ren like a ghost at some point. Whoa, looking at this, classmate Gwen is already reserved as your prom date? Hao Ren turned back and smiled, his smile carrying a hint of nonchalance. You know I hate socializing. Even for a big event like the prom, I can't muster the slightest interest. Hannah watched Gwen's receding back and said meaningfully. Then what if Gwen invites you herself? Can you still be this calm? Hao Ren rubbed his chin, pretending to think. Gwen is indeed very beautiful. I don't think any man in this school could refuse her charm. Hannah covered her mouth and laughed. Buddy, then you'd better be well prepared. After all, very special stories always happen at the prom. In American high school culture, agreeing to be a prom date is basically equivalent to an implicit romantic relationship, even more formal and grand than a regular date. Hao Ren naturally understood the implications, but his mind wasn't on picking up girls at all right now. His head was full of how to make money, a huge sum of money. The stock price of Stark Industries was still drifting lower, but there were signs of it stabilizing. This was a once-in-a-lifetime entry point. Hao Ren's urge to dive back into the stock market to buy the dip grew stronger and stronger, spreading like wildfire. For a long time to come, he would have to rely on that genius Tony Stark to work for him and make money. This was directly related to whether his wealth points could skyrocket. If he missed this opportunity, Hao Ren would probably have to resort to robbing criminals and taking money from gangs if he wanted to increase his wealth points. Robbing gangs? If I rob dirty money from gangs, I wonder if it counts toward my wealth points? If it does, could I also farm some desire points along the way? At the thought of gangs, the chaotic map of Hell's Kitchen unfolded in his mind. If the intel from Jessica Jones was correct, then his grand plan for revenge should be put on the agenda. He had waited too long for this day. It was just a pity about that thin-skinned woman, Jessica. Since that little incident that night, she hadn't contacted him for 2 days. It felt as if the woman who took his first time had just pulled up her pants and abandoned him without a word. No way. Meat that has entered my mouth. You want to slip away? Not a chance. If I have time tonight, I must make a trip to Hell's Kitchen. Thinking of this, Hao Ren instantly lost all interest in today's classes. Walking to his locker, he found that the graffiti previously scrawled on the door had been cleaned completely. That school bully Fletcher saw him from a distance and scurried away like he was seeing a plague god. Hao Ren thought about it and decided to temporarily let this clueless fellow off the hook. He went straight to his homeroom teacher, Miss Juliet, to ask for leave, and then swaggered out of the school. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for your righteous help this time. Mr. Hao, you're too polite. It's always been an honor for our Guofu Bank to cooperate with a young talent like you. In the bank's VIP room, Hao Ren firmly shook hands with the manager, Mr. Smith. This trip certainly wasn't in vain. He used all the Stark Industries stocks he held as collateral and successfully secured a large cash loan from Guofu Bank. A full 300 million United States dollars, of course. Such high efficiency was also because Mr. Smith was already an old acquaintance of his. It seemed the principle of acquaintances make things easier applied universally, whether in the East or the West. With a face full of smiles, Smith saw Hao Ren to the door. He had dealt with Hao Ren more than once or twice. After all, Hao Ren was a major client of his. Even if Hao Ren's investment vision failed this time and he lost everything, the Stark Industries shares held as collateral were enough for the bank to recover its costs. No matter how you calculated it, it was a guaranteed win. At this moment, including the loaned money, the liquid capital in Hao Ren's hands was as high as 800 million United States dollars. No matter how Hao Ren tossed it around, there was absolutely no pressure to pay back the 300 million United States dollars plus interest a year later. Moreover, as a shrewd banker, Smith had long guessed what Hao Ren wanted to do with this money. This kid was going to go heavy on buying the dip of Stark Industries. Truly a young man full of boldness. Smith watched Hao Ren's departing figure, inwardly sighing with admiration. One should know that this guy was previously a ruthless person who dared to use 20 times leverage to crazily short Stark Industries. Now he suddenly turned around and entered the market with capital to buy the dip. Once even a tiny bit of good news came from Stark Industries, this kid would definitely make a fortune. Should I also move some private savings and follow him to buy some Stark Industries stock? Smith rubbed his chin and pondered. Although Stark Industries had cut its weapons division, the foundation was still there. Tony Stark was a genius whose brain had been kissed by God. If he truly wanted to pursue civilian technology, that blue ocean market would be hundreds of times larger than the military-industrial market. Whether it was smartphones, new energy vehicles, or the field of artificial intelligence, for Tony Stark, technical barriers simply didn't exist. The current combined size of these three markets had long left the military-industrial market in the dust. In the military-industrial field, although Tony Stark was impressive, he was only one of the giants and couldn't achieve a complete monopoly. But once his technology trickled down to the civilian market, with his intelligence, he might be able to directly form a monopoly position in several fields, like a dimensional reduction strike. Furthermore, as a bank executive, Smith knew all too well how deep Tony Stark's pockets were. That playboy's wealth wasn't just Stark Industries. The inheritance and family fund left by Howard Stark back then were definitely a dizzying string of astronomical numbers. The current Tony Stark had just experienced a kidnapping and hadn't recovered yet. If the stock price continued to fall like this, with his foul temper, he would definitely step in to buy back shares, and might even privatize the company in a fit of rage. Thinking of this, Smith suddenly became energized. He returned to his office, opened his computer to check the K-line chart of Stark Industries. The market hadn't closed yet, and the current decline was around -5.1%, but the trading volume had eerily stabilized. With Smith's years of professional experience, he could tell at a glance that there was definitely large capital secretly accumulating shares. The other party's movements were very light, cautious as a thief. Throwing in $300 million United States dollars is no small sum, even on Wall Street. Given this kid's character, he will definitely pursue maximum profit. This money will surely flow into the futures market to continue adding leverage and go along. Smith logged into the back end of Interactive Brokers and indeed found large orders setting up a betting board. For brokerage firms, whether it was shorting or going long, they were just platforms earning transaction fees, a guaranteed win. After all, where there are bulls, there are bears. That's the market. At this point, Hao Ren had already transferred the $300 million United States dollars into his securities account. He directly used $200 million to open 20 times leverage, buying up $4 billion United States dollars worth of long contracts in one go. Currently, everyone in the market was crazily bearish, so Hao Ren's long contracts were like meat buns thrown to the wolves, instantly snatched up by the shorts. Clearly, the entire market was betting that Stark Industries would be finished. The trading volume in the over-the-counter futures market had even exceeded that of the main stock market. By now, Stark Industries' stock price had drifted down to $5 United States dollars and 60 cents. Hao Ren looked at the loss of over $2 million that instantly appeared on his account without even blinking. There was still $140 million in cash lying in his stock account. He first transferred $4 million United States dollars to his bank card. This would be his living expenses and girl-chasing funds for the near future. Immediately after, Hao Ren used the remaining funds to start sweeping up all available circulating shares on the market, regardless of the cost. This time, he didn't use any leverage, because he intended to hold Stark Industries stock long-term as a pension. Leverage in the futures market was for gambling with his life. Even if those positions were liquidated, as long as he held the physical shares, he could still make a comeback in the future. This was called double insurance. Soon, like a greedy beast, Hao Ren forcibly snatched 24 million shares of Stark Industries from the market. By this time, the lurking whales in the market also reacted and began to frantically follow suit to grab shares. The stock price instantly shot up like a rocket, hitting the $6 mark at one point and turning green as it surpassed yesterday's closing price. Hao Ren calculated that the average cost of his overall position was around $5 United States dollars and 70 cents. With this calculation, although it had dropped sharply during the session, he had timed the dip perfectly. His books weren't just even, they were already showing a profit of 32.1 million United States dollars. And his long positions in the futures market were earning enough to make people envious. Hao Ren's $4 billion in contracts had entered at 5.61, and now the long contracts had gained 7%. The price had pulled up from a 5.1% decline to a 1.6% gain. After this wave of operations, he had a net profit of 280 million United States dollars. As expected, playing futures is the fastest way to make money. It's practically robbery. But Hao Ren knew clearly in his heart that if he hadn't used that last 140 million to ignite the price regardless of cost, forcing the market makers to step in and support the price, he couldn't have earned this much. At this very moment, Hao Ren had quietly become the third largest individual shareholder of Stark Industries, holding 1.07% of the company's shares. Just from future dividends and stock appreciation, this investment could bring him returns of tens of billions of dollars. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the Stark Industries tower, Obadiah Stane was so angry that he slammed his whiskey glass onto the floor, glass shards shattering everywhere. Investigate. Investigate for me. Which fool is ruining my plans? The recent plunge in Stark Industries' stock price was entirely orchestrated by him. He had been spreading panic in the media just to suppress the stock price and make it easier for him to accumulate shares. He knew the depth of Stark Industries very well. There was over $30 billion United States dollars in cash flow lying in overseas accounts alone. There were also countless invisible assets that weren't even reflected in the financial reports. "Boss, we found him. It's a Chinese kid named Hao Ren," a subordinate reported tremblingly. "Mr. Stane, should we arrange for someone to?" The subordinate made a throat-slitting gesture. Obadiah Stane took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "It's only 1% of the shares. He can't make much of a wave. Leave him alone for now. I've already secured enough chips to become the largest shareholder. Combined with the institutional shareholders have won over, it's enough to kick that arrogant fool Tony out of the board of directors." Obadiah Stane knew very well that the current priority was to get the armor technology in Tony's hands. He could steal that miniature arc reactor. But Tony's Iron Man armor wouldn't work. It was locked down by that advanced artificial intelligence, Jarvis. "Continue sweeping the market for me. Throw in all the remaining funds. No matter what, we must get as many shares in our hands as possible today." Stane knew he was taking a massive gamble this time. The amount of capital he was using was too much. And according to the agreement, those vampires from Wall Street would enter the market tomorrow. He didn't have much time left. After tomorrow, his news of increasing his shareholding would have to be disclosed to the SEC. A severe drop in stock price was no longer beneficial to him. Instead, a rise could stabilize morale and give him higher prestige within the company. Otherwise, given the influence of Tony's surname in the company, it would be difficult for him to completely shake Tony's foundation. As soon as he drove Tony away, the first thing he would do is restart the weapons manufacturing department. Once the arc reactor was mass-produced and the Iron Man armor debuted, the entire USA would put him on a pedestal. By then, the stocks in his hand doubling would be the bare minimum. "That little mouse named Hao Ren, let him look after my wealth for a while. Once I have the armor technology, I'll catch him and make him spit out everything he took, with interest." Hao Ren had no idea he had already been targeted by the major villain, Obadiah Stane. But even if he knew, he would only sneer at it. His layout was complete, and the momentum was on his side. To prevent liquidation, he still held a trump card. If Stark Industries continued to fall irrationally, he would directly leak news of the arc reactor technology to the media. Mass production of miniaturized cold fusion energy. Once this news was released, the global energy market would experience an earthquake. Obadiah Stane, that old bald head, wants to keep playing tricks? In his dreams. By the time Hao Ren drove back to the school, the horizon was already painted with the afterglow of dusk. From afar, he saw a blonde beauty standing in the parking spot where he had parked this morning. Even though it was just a silhouette from behind, he could tell she was surrounded by dark clouds, clearly impatient from waiting. Hao Ren sighed helplessly, but he had to admit that seeing someone waiting for him gently tugged at a heartstring deep inside. The black Lincoln Navigator, like an elegant beast, came to a steady stop in front of Gwen Stacy. AI model. GEMINI 3.1 flashlight. "Gwen, I'm truly sorry for keeping you waiting." Hao Ren rolled down the car window, his tone sincere. After all, letting a girl stand around for half an hour for nothing was truly ungentlemanly. Gwen Stacy kept a cold expression on her pretty face, her tone laced with icicles. "I accept your apology, Mr. Hao. Get in, I'll take you home." Hao Ren didn't waste any more words, resting his hand on the steering wheel to gesture for her to enter. Gwen Stacy opened the car door and sat in. "Student Hao, do you know that making a lady wait in the cold wind is a very ungentlemanly thing to do?" As soon as her bottom touched the leather seat, she began to express her dissatisfaction. "Sorry, I was delayed handling some business at the bank today. I only remembered our appointment when I arrived at the school gate, and even rushing as much as I could, I was still late." Hao Ren explained patiently. "HMPH, I don't care where you went." Gwen Stacy buckled her seatbelt indignantly, clearly still throwing a little tantrum. "Drive, to the Osborne Group Tower." Well, it seems I've really become a full-time driver now. However, upon hearing the words, Osborne Group Tower, Hao Ren's eyes lit up instantly, as if a hunter had caught the scent of prey. It seems Gwen had already found a place to intern. The Osborne Group was, after all, a top-tier global biotechnology giant. To be able to intern at such a company while still in high school, it was certain that with Gwen's resume, she could pick and choose from the world's top universities in the future. Although Hao Ren's grades were even better than Gwen's, without such a heavyweight recommendation letter, even with high scores, he might not necessarily get into an Ivy League school. But at this point, Hao Ren had long since let go of that. It wasn't as if he hadn't been to college, making him struggle through university now. Learning those dry professional subjects, or trying to network with so-called alumni, was all just superficial nonsense. With his current capital, even in a capitalist society like the USA, he could directly join the top-tier social circles. Hao Ren pulled his thoughts back and finally revealed a sincere smile. The Osborne Group? Is that the famous Osborne? Hearing this, Gwen's mood finally shifted from cloudy to sunny. Of course, who else could it be but that Osborne? Her tone carried an undisguisable hint of pride. Usually, Gwen was a very gentle and kind girl, basically having no temper. But in front of Hao Ren, for some reason, she always wanted to show off her proud and excellent side. This time, she felt she had finally scored a point. Congratulations, Gwen. Being able to intern at the Osborne Group. If you can get a recommendation letter from a professor there, with your grades, the doors to every university in the US will be wide open for you. Hao Ren's tone revealed a hint of perfectly measured envy. Gwen's spirits soared even higher, having long since cast the unhappiness of waiting for him to the back of her mind. Actually, I've always wanted to study at Cambridge University. After saying this, Gwen's gaze unconsciously fell upon Hao Ren's profile. Those firm lines and the aura of a mature man made her feel inexplicably nervous. Cambridge, that's a good school. But compared to the gloomy weather in London, I still prefer the bright sunshine of New York. A hint of regret permeated Hao Ren's tone. These words made Gwen's heart skip a beat, creating an inexplicable wavering. Was choosing to go to Cambridge really a good idea? Gwen Stacy fell into deep thought, and the car returned to silence. Soon, the towering Oscorp Tower appeared in their view. Do you need me to accompany you inside? After parking the car, Hao Ren asked gentlemanly. You want to go inside and tour the Oscorp Tower? Gwen Stacy looked at Hao Ren with a smile, a hint of slyness in her eyes. Of course. This is the Osborne Group, a holy land of technology. I've been longing to see it for a long time. Hao Ren's face showed an expression of excitement, acting as if it were real. But internally, he was complaining frantically. He didn't know if the plotline of this Osborne Group was the Tobey Maguire version or the Andrew Garfield The Amazing Spider-Man version. But no matter which version it was, it didn't matter to the current Hao Ren. What was important was that he had to complete that annoying task issued by the system. Seize Peter Parker's opportunity and create the birth of Ghost Spider. Task rank, Blue. I can take you in for a tour, but we have an agreement. You cannot run around. Gwen thought for a moment and extended an invitation to Hao Ren. Okay. I promise to follow instructions. Hao Ren found a spot and parked the car. The two walked side by side into the Oscorp Tower. Gwen obviously wasn't interning here for the first time, as she was very familiar with the security guards at the entrance. She skillfully helped Hao Ren get a visitor's pass and then took him directly to the floor for the genetic modification department. Wearing a lab coat, Gwen Stacy's temperament changed instantly. She had a little less immaturity and a bit more intellectual beauty. The contrasting temptation brought about by this uniform was simply off the charts. Even for an old hand like Hao Ren, who had a heart of iron, seeing this scene couldn't help but make his heart rate accelerate. But he covered it up well, appearing on the surface to be full of interest in touring the high-tech products. He took a turn around the exhibition area but didn't see any experimental items related to spiders. At this point, he basically had an idea. This was definitely the Amazing Spider-Man plotline. Just then, he inadvertently saw that familiar face in the crowd. Peter Parker? This guy actually snuck in? A playful smile curled the corners of Hao Ren's mouth. The show was about to begin. This mission wasn't just about making Gwen become Spider-Man. More importantly, it was about taking away the opportunity that belonged to Peter Parker. Hao Ren looked down at the visitor's pass on his chest. He lowered the brim of his hat, walked calmly up to a security guard, whispered a few words, and then cast his eyes intentionally or unintentionally in Peter Parker's direction. Meanwhile, although Gwen Stacy was talking to Dr. Connors, her peripheral vision was always keeping an eye on Hao Ren's movements. Despite the distance, she soon noticed something wrong. Peter Parker? Gwen Stacy was stunned for a moment. She saw two burly security guards walking straight toward Peter Parker. Peter Parker was completely bewildered, and before he could react to what was happening, he was escorted out by the security guards, one on each side. It seems he was put straight on the blacklist. Hao Ren winked at Gwen Stacy in the distance, revealed a meaningful smile, and then, taking advantage of no one paying attention, turned and walked toward the laboratory direction of the restricted visitor area. Gwen Stacy frowned deeply. A strong sense of unease suddenly welled up in her heart. She was worried about Hao Ren acting recklessly. This was the core area of the Osborn group, and if he were discovered, Hao Ren would definitely be in big trouble. Hao Ren was currently following behind a familiar-looking man in a suit, watching him enter a password on the keyboard. After the man in the suit went in, he quickly stepped forward and entered the password in the same way. The sensor-activated automatic door opened in response. The moment the door opened, Hao Ren pressed his palm against the metal door frame, and a wave of extreme freezing energy from the ice fruit spread along the frame, instantly destroying the internal sensor closing mechanism. This door could no longer close. The opportunity has arrived. A glint of light flashed in Hao Ren's eyes. He lifted his foot and stepped into the laboratory. Seeing this, Gwen dared not make a sound and hurriedly jogged to catch up. After entering the experimental area, she looked around but found that Hao Ren was nowhere to be seen. Unknowingly, she walked into a special area marked Spider Manufacturing Plant. Meanwhile, Hao Ren was hiding in the shadows of a corner, his body gradually returning to normal from a transparent elemental ice state. He used the ability of the ice fruit to make himself briefly invisible, creating a perfect blind spot. Just then, a colorful mutated spider descended along a silk thread and landed on Gwen's fair neck. Ding! Congratulations to the host, successfully completed the task, the birth of Ghost Spider, and received a blue blind box reward. Since you have selected the task rolling mode, the system automatically starts the next round of tasks. New task released. Wool of Revenge. Burn the fire of revenge throughout Hell's Kitchen, avenge your parents, and completely destroy the power of the triads in Hell's Kitchen. Task difficulty: white, blue. Special note: the more social scum you clear out, the higher the final task settlement reward will be. Hao Ren stroked his smooth chin, the corners of his mouth curling upward. This task was simply a freebie. After confirming that Gwen had been bitten, Hao Ren quietly left the experimental area and returned to the exhibition area outside. Not long after, Gwen ran out of the experimental area with a panicked expression, her hand constantly covering her neck. "Gwen, what's wrong? You look so pale." Hao Ren immediately greeted her, asking with a look of concern. Gwen subconsciously touched the red, swollen bump on the back of her neck and feigned composure. I'm fine. By the way, where did you run off to just now? Did you go into the experimental area? Was that the experimental area? Sorry, I just had to use the restroom and got lost. I didn't cause you any trouble, did I? Hao Ren looked innocent, his acting skills deserving of an Oscar. No. Nothing. Forget it. Let's go back. Gwen Stacy felt dizzy and feverish at this moment, wanting only to rush home and lie down. Gwen, are you really okay? Do you want to go to the hospital? Hao Ren confirmed again. No need, I'm just a bit sleepy. I want to go back and sleep, and I'll be fine. See you tomorrow. Gwen Stacy's voice was filled with thick fatigue. Alright then, see you tomorrow. Hao Ren watched her leave with a smile. Truly, happy events make one feel refreshed. This trip not only earned him a lot of money, but he also completed the task, successfully arranging the future female Spider-Man. The sense of accomplishment in his heart was simply overflowing. System, Ghost Spider has really been born, right? Don't let some mutated monster come out. Hao Ren was still somewhat worried about Gwen's safety. If she turned into one of those spider monsters with 8 legs, it would be far too terrifying. Host, please rest assured. You have perfectly completed the task, and the plot has been corrected. Hearing the system's assurance, Hao Ren finally felt completely at ease. He never expected that the legendary Ghost Spider would actually be born by his hand. He just didn't know if Gwen Stacy, a flower raised in a greenhouse, was mentally prepared to become a superhero. After all, the growth of every hero is a history written in blood and tears. According to the original Ghost Spider plot, Gwen Stacy's awakening was triggered by the death of her close friend, Peter Parker, in her arms. Such a massive blow was what forced her to grow. This was the so-called sacrifice of friend to the heavens for boundless power. Now that Peter Parker had been removed from the picture by him, Surely the unlucky fate of being the sacrifice wouldn't fall on his own head, right? At that thought, Hao Ren's expression suddenly became a bit strange. Returning home and finishing dinner, Hao Ren waited patiently until night had fully fallen before preparing to head out. Not far ahead was the place that struck fear into countless hearts, Hell's Kitchen. Hao Ren changed into a pitch-black, tight-fitting combat suit, put on a mask, and pulled up his hood, seemingly merging into the night. With his head down, he navigated the filthy, dilapidated streets of Hell's Kitchen with practiced familiarity. Homeless people and junkies lay sprawled across both sides of the street, their green-tinted eyes staring at him like hungry wolves, tracking his every move. Hao Ren could even clearly feel his desire points constantly ticking upward. He could capture the greed and malice radiating from these societal dregs. It was a nauseating aura. But Hao Ren didn't move against these small-time thugs. It wasn't worth wasting his stamina. His target was the triads, controlled by Madame Gao. However, Hao Ren knew very well that the waters in Hell's Kitchen were deep. Pulling a single hair could move the whole body. Anyone who dared to underestimate Hell's Kitchen would eventually pay a heavy price. These few small blocks were the petri dish for all the evil in New York. Kingpin, Madame Gao, Nobu Yoshioka, the Russian brothers. The triads, the Irish gang, the Russian gang, the Hand, and those international drug cartels, the various factions were intricately intertwined. Of course, quite a few heroes were born here as well. But for the criminals of Hell's Kitchen, there was only one true demon. Daredevil. Because of Hell's Kitchen's unique nature, many people privately referred to this hero of justice as the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. Hao Ren stood in the middle of the empty street. He looked up at the dilapidated building opposite him. Under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights, the building appeared exceptionally eerie. Hao Ren narrowed his eyes. This was the location marked in the intelligence Jessica Jones had given him. With his hands in his pockets and a cold glint flashing in his eyes, he was pondering a serious question. Was this mission really worth using the power of the ice fruit? If it were a simple gang war, that would be one thing. But if a mutant acted against ordinary people, the nature of the situation would change completely. SHIELD, X-Men, the military. These troublesome terms flashed through his mind one by one. Once exposed, his current peaceful life would be shattered in an instant. This was the core reason why countless superheroes were forced to wear masks when they went out. No one wanted their quiet private life to be disrupted. And even less did they want the friends and family around them to become live targets for a rival's frantic revenge. Of course, it couldn't be ruled out that some guys had a special cross-dressing fetish, wearing bizarre costumes to parade around and enjoy the vanity of being worshipped by thousands. However, none of these reasons applied to Hao Ren. His reason for wearing a mask was purely because he found dealing with that bald braised egg too troublesome. Looking at him was irritating. He was truly afraid that if he couldn't hold back, he would chop that pitch-black braised egg right then and there. Thump, thump, thump. Hao Ren raised his hand and pounded heavily on the tightly closed, thick iron door, the dull impact echoing through the corridor. The viewing window on the door slid open with a clatter. A pair of cold and wary eyes stared intently at Hao Ren. "What are you doing here?" As expected, it was a watchdog for the triads. With his mask covering half his face, the corners of Hao Ren's eyes curved slightly, revealing a playful smirk. "No special reason, I just wanted to ask. Have you ever tasted what it's like to be kicked by 10,000-year-old ice?" Before his voice could fade, his leg instantly completed an elemental restructuring into ice crystals. Feeling the explosive power filling his leg after the ice fruit's elementalization, Hao Ren did not hesitate for a second and delivered a thunderous kick to the large iron door. Boom! Terrifying force erupted instantly, and the entire heavy iron door flew inward like a cannonball. The unlucky thug behind the door didn't even have time to scream before being flattened against the wall, his body mangled as if repeatedly crushed by a heavy pickup truck. Enemy attack! Get your weapons! In the chaos, Hao Ren even heard a few familiar curses in his native tongue. He stepped into the room as if taking a leisurely stroll, and a chilling killing intent instantly saturated the air. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat, several machine guns spat tongues of fire, and a dense web of bullets instantly covered him. Hao Ren stood where he was, without even blinking, completely disdaining to dodge. In an instant, his body completely transformed into indestructible polar ice. Clang, 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 bullets slammed frantically into his ice crystal body, splashing countless ice shards. the crisp sounds of impact were almost drowned out by the deafening gunfire. Baji Mizong fist. Hao Ren slammed his feet into the ground, pouncing into the crowd like a fierce tiger descending a mountain. This was the perfect combination of an elementalized body and Chinese martial arts. His hands turned into icy iron fists 100 times harder than steel. Every punch he threw was accompanied by the crisp sound of shattering bones. One punch for one person, blowing them apart directly. He casually snatched a rifle that was still warm. Hao Ren stood tall and imposing, engaging in a shootout with the Triad gang members inside the stronghold. He relied entirely on his superhumanly sharp intuition to control the weapon. But to be honest, Hao Ren's original marksmanship was indeed a complete mess, not fit to be shown. System, don't dawdle, use my wealth points to max out my marksmanship directly. Ding! Consumed 50,000 wealth points. Congratulations to the host for obtaining sharpshooter level marksmanship mastery. As the system's prompt faded, Hao Ren's grip on the gun changed instantly. Holding the gun with one hand, he began firing with rhythmic precision. Bang! 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 With every gunshot, a Triad member inevitably fell with a bullet to the forehead. Even those who were scared out of their wits and tried to flee in panic were not spared. Hao Ren didn't even seem to aim, simply flicking his wrist to reward each of them with a precise peanut. The muscle memory of a sharpshooter allowed his marksmanship to instantly reach the peak level of human physiological capability. At this moment, he was a cold-blooded killing machine, completely ignoring the enemy's counterattacks as he ruthlessly harvested lives, sending this group of drug-dealing scum to hell. A moment later, the room was a mess, with blood winding together to form a river. Looking at the mountain of white flour and the bundles of tempting US dollars, Hao Ren quickly swept all the cash into black handbags. As for that harmful flour, it naturally had to be destroyed completely. Nothing was more thorough than a fire. The mission wasn't over yet, and carrying 2 large bags of cash was indeed a bit cumbersome. But this was solid wealth points. With Hao Ren's miserly personality, he wouldn't part with it even if it killed him. With such a big commotion, that meddling daredevil is probably already on his way. A cruel and playful smile curled at the corner of Hao Ren's mouth. Tonight, the entirety of Hell's Kitchen will welcome a new birth in the flames. Splashing gasoline and finding some improvised bombs, he skillfully set the detonation time. Hao Ren carried the 2 heavy bags of cash, smashed the window of a van near the entrance with his elbow, and threw all the looted spoils into the vehicle. The true enemies are still at large. Tonight, I'm going to blow the top off Hell's Kitchen. Hao Ren muttered to himself. But he knew very well that the blind lawyer in the tight leather suit on the roof could definitely hear him clearly. Boom! Fire soared behind him as the shockwave of the explosion swept out. Hao Ren calmly started the van and sped away, flooring the gas pedal. He had already figured out the location of Madame Gao's secret flour-making kitchen, and he knew even better where her main hideout was. The dilapidated van sped wildly through the streets, its engine letting out an overburdened roar. Meanwhile, on the rooftops on either side, Daredevil leapt and tracked him like a ghost. In the driver's seat, a strange, mischievous grin appeared on Hao Ren's face. Just as Daredevil leapt high once more, preparing to land on the next roof, a layer of thin ice, undetectable until then, had covered the tiles. The moment Daredevil's feet touched down, the massive impact caused him to lose his balance instantly. His feet slipped, and he fell hard on his face. The fall was so solid it looked painful just to watch. Daredevil, don't say I didn't warn you. If you dare follow me again, I don't mind skewering your backside with an ice spike and making it come out of your mouth. Hao Ren lowered his voice and threatened the air coldly. He knew that with Daredevil's freakish hearing, he could hear it from 8 streets away. This was just a well-intentioned warning. After all, Matt Murdock had helped him before. Hao Ren was clear about his debts and wouldn't deal a lethal blow to him. Back when his parents had their accident and he was dealing with a messy inheritance, Matt was the one busy handling everything. Back then, he was even a minor and should have been sent to a foster home to suffer, but Matt did everything he could to find a family in Chinatown and forged a relative relationship so he could settle down. During these 2 years spent in Hell's Kitchen, Matt had also looked out for him in secret as his incarnation, Daredevil. Therefore, he didn't want to drag Daredevil into this muddy water tonight. Hell's Kitchen, the core area, Chinatown building. It was late at night, and the doors of the Chinatown building were tightly shut. As the highest-class restaurant in Hell's Kitchen, business was usually booming here. But Hao Ren knew clearly that beneath this magnificent restaurant, All sorts of conscience-less deeds were being carried out. Human trafficking, drug distribution, arms smuggling. There was nothing they wouldn't do if you could imagine it. Madame Gao's status, whether in Hell's Kitchen or Chinatown, made her the undisputed big boss behind the scenes. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the restaurant, a mean-looking, lean, and capable old woman dressed in a simple white training suit stood quietly before the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out expressionlessly at the flames rising from the streets in the distance. Kitchen number 3 was burned. Who did it? The Irish madmen? The Japanese ninjas? Or those barbarians from Ross's gang? Madame Gao's tone was calm, yet it carried a heart-palpitating indifference. Several confidants standing behind her lowered their heads, not even daring to breathe loudly. How many times have I told you? In business, be low-key and hide your light. Madame Gao slowly turned around, her cloudy old eyes scanning the members of the triads, many of whom were new faces. Even if we have the power to wipe out our enemies' families, once things blow up, the losses are immeasurable. If we usually keep our heads down, we can always avoid being bitten by those desperate mad dogs. Her tone now was like a kind old grandmother next door, patiently teaching her ignorant grandchildren. Unfortunately, you've all been getting too arrogant lately, causing my reputation to be exposed to the spotlight. If I were an enemy, I could just grab 2 junkies and ask around to find the door to kitchen number 3. A hint of clear dissatisfaction entered Madame Gao's voice. Madam, should we take some men now and drag that fool out to tear him to pieces? The one speaking was Jordan. Madame Gao glanced at him. He was an obedient boy, daring and aggressive, who had made a lot of money for the triads. Nonsense. If we don't find the person, how many of my remaining kitchens do you think will survive? Madame Gao narrowed her eyes, a sinister and terrifying smile curling at the corners of her mouth. Boom! Another violent explosion rang out across the night sky of Hell's Kitchen. Madame Gao suddenly turned and lunged to the window, staring intently at the distant flames. That direction was kitchen number 1. This is bad. Madame Gao's heart sank. She had encountered a truly ruthless person tonight. Moreover, the opponent's target was extremely clear. They were coming to destroy the triads. Before she could even recover, only a few minutes passed. A mushroom cloud also rose from the direction of kitchen number 2. Madam, we must immediately send heavy troops to guard kitchen number 4. The white man, Jordan, roared with a face full of anger. Idiot! You're not allowed to go. Gather everyone and immediately return to defend the Chinatown building. Hold the headquarters. Madame Gao's face was so dark it looked like it could drip water, her eyes a mix of killing intent and anxiety. The opponent intended to pull up her foundation in Hell's Kitchen by the roots. Who exactly was it, to have such great courage and appetite? Why, madam? Jordan was puzzled. Because it's my order, Jordan. Madame Gao glared at him fiercely, her eyes looking as if they could devour someone. Jordan shrank back in fear and immediately lowered his head. Enough, go and have the boys bring out their gear. The guest will be at our door soon. Was it a mutant riot, or those meddling superheroes? Madame Gao was also uncertain. She picked up an encrypted phone and began urgently contacting other allied gangs, even directly dialing the number of the underground underworld emperor, Kingpin. However, before the call could finish, intense gunfire suddenly erupted from downstairs. The dense sound of guns and cannons was enough to blow the roof off the Chinatown building. Madame Gao sighed deeply and shook her head helplessly. She could only brace herself to face it. Meanwhile, in the first-floor lobby, Hao Ren held a submachine gun in each hand, sweeping through the entire Chinatown building as if entering an uninhabited place. Monster. This is an unkillable monster. The Chinatown building was in chaos, with people constantly screaming and fleeing. Fear spread like a plague through the crowd. Intense gunfire accompanied by successive explosions turned this place into a Shira field. The whole of Hell's Kitchen was in an uproar, and other underworld forces were also alerted, sending people to investigate. Enough! An old but powerful roar came from upstairs. Madame Gao's shout carried immense penetration. Who would have thought such a voice could come from a woman in her 70s or 80s? Unfortunately, her demonic authority couldn't suppress the god of slaughter downstairs who was emitting cold chi. Fighting to this point, Hao Ren also realized he had overestimated the quality of his outfit. If he hadn't timely elementalized and assimilated his clothes, they would have been shot into rags long ago, failing to cover his handsome face. However, using elementalization meant his ability was completely exposed. Iceman, I have no old grudges or recent enmity with your X-Men. Why are you leading men to attack my triads? Do you mutants want to start a full-scale war with the entire Underworld Alliance? Madame Gao stood at the second-floor railing, questioning him with uncontrollable rage. Hao Ren deliberately lowered his voice, making it sound raspy and cold. You old woman are Madame Gao? Hao Ren lowered his muzzles and temporarily stopped firing. Shush! A rocket trailed fire as it whistled toward him, heading straight for his face. Ice shield. A massive shield of extreme cold instantly condensed in Hao Ren's hands. Boom! The violent explosion's fire was instantly and ruthlessly suppressed by the ice, without even making a ripple. Is this your so-called sincerity for a ceasefire? Hao Ren slowly raised his head, a faint blue cold light flickering in his eyes. Madame Gao's pupils constricted sharply, and she shouted sternly. Everyone stop! Whoever dares to fire again, I'll shoot him myself. Seeing Madame Gao back down, Hao Ren casually dispersed the ice shield. He even arrogantly threw the guns in his hands onto the ground. He put his hands in his pockets, revealing only a pair of dark, deep pupils under his mask, looking at Madame Gao upstairs with a faint smile. By now, more and more members of the triads were gathering, surrounding the Chinatown building so tightly that not even water could leak through. On the periphery, there were even spies from other gangs peeking around, waiting for the triads to show a weakness so they could get a piece of the pie. Madame Gao forced a fake smile, trying to release goodwill. Your Excellency, is there some misunderstanding between us? Without a word, Hao Ren took a photo from his coat and flicked his wrist. The photo shot toward Madame Gao like a flying dagger. Madame Gao reached out and caught the photo steadily between two fingers. This move alone showed that the old woman was definitely a trained martial artist. 5 minutes. I want to see these two people. Hao Ren stopped looking at Madame Gao's disgusting old face, his gaze scanning the surroundings as his cold, heartless voice clearly reached every corner of the street. If I don't see them within 5 minutes, I don't mind completely erasing the name, the Triads, from the map of Hell's Kitchen. Madame Gao, you come from the distant east and are a person of experience. You should know very well that there are powers in this world that can flatten your triads as easily as crushing an ant. This sinister, cold voice drilled into the ears of every member of the triads, making their teeth itch with rage. Hundreds of eyes glared furiously, staring fixedly at Hao Ren. Surrounded by a forest of guns and even several rocket launchers, the firepower was enough to outfit a reinforced battalion. But Hao Ren completely ignored it. Madame Gao looked at the two people in the photo, her back teeth nearly grinding to dust in anger. Find them. Bring them here immediately, do not fail. Killing intent and fury intertwined, making Madame Gao's order full of irresistible authority. The white man Jordan took the photo, glanced at it, and turned to run. He had to be fast because he had already realized that the guns and cannons in their hands were useless against that monster. The atmosphere on the scene was heavy to the extreme. Despite it being a sweltering summer night, what flowed through the air was a bone-chilling cold that made everyone shiver. Time passed second by second, the ticking sounds seemingly thumping in everyone's hearts. Hao Ren casually condensed a chair out of ice, sat down swaggeringly with his legs crossed, and quietly looked out the window. His keen five senses could clearly perceive a large number of dangerous individuals quickly gathering around. Hell's Kitchen, a place of trouble, a breeding ground for evil. There was never a shortage of desperate outlaws who didn't fear death here, let alone the so-called superheroes. But tonight, Madame Gao was afraid, she had compromised. From the time the triads were attacked until now, in just a short hour, hundreds of brothers had already died. This was simply a one-sided slaughter. The corpses were almost piled up like mountains. If this continued, the entire triads would have to be buried with this ice demon. What made Madame Gao's heart skip a beat the most was that the opponent had only used guns and fists to kill from beginning to end. That terrifying freezing ability was only used for defense, he hadn't even exerted himself yet. Madame Gao's scalp went numb. This was no human, this was clearly a god of death wearing human skin. The 5-minute time limit was approaching. Hao Ren slowly stood up. Along with his movement, everyone's nerves in the entire Chinatown building hall tensed up, and they subconsciously aimed their muzzles in unison at this masked man. Just then, a hurried sound of footsteps came. At the same time, Madame Gao's phone rang. She didn't want to answer it, but seeing the caller ID was Kingpin, she could only bite the bullet and pick up. Madame Gao, stall him. My men have already made their move. Kingpin's heavy and majestic voice came from the other end of the phone. Madame Gao's face changed slightly. Mr. Kingpin, I don't need your charity. No, you don't understand. Hell's Kitchen cannot be in chaos, at least the existing order cannot collapse. So, you must listen to me. Kingpin's voice was cold and devoid of any emotion. After saying this, he hung up the phone directly. That overbearing will simply did not allow anyone to disobey. A faint, almost imperceptible arc crossed the corner of Hao Ren's mouth. Kingpin? Was that massive underworld emperor unable to resist stepping in as well? It seemed that touching Madame Gao tonight was equivalent to touching Kingpin's cheese. With so many people dead, the whole of New York would explode tomorrow. For the gangs of Hell's Kitchen, this was definitely not good news. But the good show had only just begun. Hao Ren had originally only intended to create the illusion of a gang vendetta. But when he saw the system's notifications frantically flooding the screen, he changed his mind. Ding! You have created chaos and killed a gang member. The extreme fear generated at the moment of death has been converted into desire points plus 8,000. Ding! You have created panic and killed a gang member. Desire points plus 6,000. Ding! Your actions have caused gang members to generate fear and anger. Desire points plus 600. Desire points were skyrocketing. Hao Ren had already harvested more than 1.6 million desire points along the way. At this moment, everyone in Hell's Kitchen was in a state of extreme panic. The threshold of fear had been broken, forming a terrifying chain reaction. It was no exaggeration to say that tonight, he was the nightmare in the hearts of everyone in Hell's Kitchen. Hell has descended. It's time to eat, the plan has changed. Hao Ren was not short of money for the time being. What he lacked were desire points to break through the realm barriers. He wanted to create fear, to create even greater fear. He wanted to carve his own symbol of terror into this world, so that as soon as anyone saw him, they would instinctively generate the desire known as fear. Isn't desire just the most intense emotional fluctuation deep in one's heart? Clearly, he had found a shortcut to becoming strong. No one knew better than him how desperate the future of the Marvel Universe would be. That purple sweet potato essence, Thanos, and the high and mighty Celestials were like two great mountains pressing down hard on his heart. Killing these social dregs could both make him stronger and purify the environment. Why not do it? To deal with that unknown dark future, the only way out was to become strong, stronger than anyone else. He didn't want to be cannon fodder. Hao Ren even harbored the ambition of immortality in his heart. After all, in this universe, it wasn't some unreachable technology. I brought the people you wanted, Madame Gao said with a grim face. Jordan, a white man, dragged those two target figures in like dead dogs. Hao Ren raised his wrist and glanced at the watch hands. Exactly 10 seconds late. Before his voice even faded, Hao Ren lightning fast drew the large caliber revolver from his waist and fired a shot at Jordan's head. Bang! That arrogant white man was full of anger and hadn't expected Hao Ren to fire without any warning. The bullet accurately drilled into the center of his forehead, and the massive kinetic energy of the large caliber bullet directly blew off the top of his skull. You! Madame Gao suddenly stepped forward, killing intent clear in her eyes, but her years of shrewdness made her forcefully suppress the anger in her heart. Just for 10 seconds, you took the life of one of my top generals. Your Excellency, aren't you going too far? Hearing Madame Gao's questioning, Hao Ren looked disdainful. You've already lost hundreds of subordinates anyway, one more doesn't matter. What I hate most in this life is when others are late. Madame Gao's chest heaved violently, clearly extremely angry. But in the entire place, only she could clearly sense what kind of terrifying energy was contained within this ice demon. Your Excellency, the people are handed over to you. Please keep your promise and get out of the Chinatown building with them immediately. Madame Gao's only thought now was to quickly send this god of plague away. At this time, ear-piercing sirens sounded outside Hell's Kitchen. It seems some kind-hearted citizens have helped you call the police. I just wonder, if that kind person knew you were selling drugs to their children and trafficking their children all over the world, would they, like me, turn into a vengeful ghost to seek your life? Hao Ren spoke unhurriedly, his voice very light, but this voice seemed to have magic, traveling very, very far. As his voice fell, the temperature inside the Chinatown building plummeted, as if it had instantly entered winter. Your Excellency, please calm your anger, before Madame Gao could finish speaking. Bang! A specially made armor-piercing bullet instantly penetrated Hao Ren's head. However, in his elemental state, his brain had already turned into a cloud of ice mist, with no physical form, so naturally, he wouldn't suffer any harm. Instead, after the bullet passed through his head, it was instantly frozen and cracked into metal powder. Hao Ren wasn't angry, instead, it seemed as expected. Madame Gao's eyes widened, her heart once again jumping into her throat. Tell Kingpin for me, he owes me for this shot. Hao Ren looked at Madame Gao coldly. He actually heard Kingpin's phone call. An unspeakable fear suddenly welled up in Madame Gao's heart. Crackle, crackle. The frost under Hao Ren's feet began to spread wildly. Under his control, the white ice mist spread out in all directions like a bursting flood. Madame Gao's face changed drastically. Although this old lady was old, her movements were more agile than a monkey's. With a few leaps, she crashed through the window and jumped out, fleeing for her life. The members of the triads gathered in the Chinatown building completely broke down, squeezing out with all their might. Fear reached its peak at this moment. Hao Ren deliberately controlled the spreading speed of the ice mist, like a cat playing with a mouse. And the two true culprits who murdered his parents were instantly frozen into lifelike ice sculptures. Those in the Chinatown building hall who didn't have time to escape were instantly swallowed by the ice mist, frost crawling all over their bodies, their faces still maintaining that distorted expression due to extreme fear. Demon! It's the ice demon! Run! The ice mist seemed to have gained life, turning into pale giant hands that grabbed, swallowed, and sealed the people of the triads one by one. In just 1 minute, the hundreds of triad elites gathered in the Chinatown building were completely wiped out, all of them frozen. However, the ice mist did not stop. It whistled out along the street, its speed not slowing down at all, pouncing on those gang members watching from the periphery. They were running wildly, screaming. But in the end, they were all frozen in those huge blocks of hard ice. Centered on the Chinatown building, the 3 surrounding streets were all covered by thick frost. A forest of ice sculptures, fully over 1,000 of them. Their eyes forever retained the despair and fear of the moment they were frozen. Hao Ren walked up to those 2 specific ice sculptures. Searching for you 2 rats wasted quite a bit of my precious time. But it was all worth it. Hao Ren's face was solemn. There was no wild joy of revenge in his eyes, only a dead silence. Indifferent as 10,000-year-old black ice, at this moment, his heart could not feel the slightest emotional fluctuation. Because his heart had completely elementalized. What flowed inside was no longer warm blood, but extreme freezing power. An icy heart suppressed all biological instinctive reactions. Walking out of the Chinatown building, he looked at that tattered van at the door. Trying to start the ignition, the engine could actually still turn. Thus, the murderer who had just created a shocking tragedy slowly drove the broken car away from the scene. Having escaped with her life, Madame Gao finally stopped. She turned around and looked at her subordinates who hadn't managed to escape behind her, who had now all turned into crystal-clear ice sculptures. Fear was deeply engraved in the depths of her soul. With such a terrifying range of ice mist, if this mysterious ice demon had lost control just now, half of Hell's Kitchen would probably have turned into an ice age tonight. Winter has arrived, and the demon has risen. Madame Gao suddenly felt a strong urge in her heart. She wanted to flee Hell's Kitchen, even flee the USA. But in the next second, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a venomous killing intent. Having dominated the underworld for decades, she had never suffered such a massive loss. The other party had spared her life. But Madame Gao knew in her heart that the ice demon would definitely come back for her. He still wanted something from her. The fact that she survived was definitely not because the other party was soft-hearted. How could a demon with no human heart, only a heart of ice, have mercy on worldly ants? Ice demon, you'd better hide deep, since you didn't kill me. What you will face next is the endless pursuit of our entire underworld alliance. I swear I will find everyone related to you one by one and torture them to death. This time, you didn't just destroy the triads, you offended the entire underground world. And those special government agencies in the USA, they won't let you go. Madame Gao knew that the ice demon, who had caused such a large-scale massacre, would definitely be placed on the USA's official kill list. None of those high and mighty big shots wanted to see the existence of such an extraordinary power that transcended their own lives. They would try to control it, and if they couldn't, they would destroy it completely. Hao Ren drove the van to an abandoned factory in the New York suburbs and ditched it. Then, stepping on his skateboard, he slid back to the parking spot like an ordinary skater boy to retrieve his private car. As for the 2 large bags of dirty money he had snatched, he buried them in a secret place for the time being. When he got home, it was already 3 in the morning. Hao Ren fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow, completely ignoring that New York outside had already completely boiled over. New York Police Director George Stacy's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot at this moment. The scene before him made even this veteran policeman feel incredibly shocked. 3 entire streets in Hell's Kitchen were completely frozen in ice. Countless gang members were frozen on the streets, maintaining their poses of trying to escape. They were lifelike, like works of art. Looking at these ice sculptures for a moment, it made one think that time had been paused here. Director, all the Triad's strongholds in Hell's Kitchen were uprooted tonight. Finally, this ice demon went straight for the heart and stormed the Chinatown building. Captain Mark, who was in charge of anti-gang and narcotics, walked over and reported to George with a grim face. Also, the FBI, NSA, and DHS have all arrived. The NSA is military, and the DHS handles counter-terrorism. Over 1,000 people died, although they were all gang scum. This matter was too big to be covered up no matter what. George Stacy knew in his heart that early tomorrow morning, this news would cause a sensation throughout the USA and even the entire world. New York would once again become the focus of global attention. Those mutants, George Stacy cursed fiercely in his heart. Compared to the commotions mutants had caused before, tonight's events in Hell's Kitchen could only be considered child's play. Those guys dared to attack the White House and invade military bases. George Stacy was well aware that this case had already exceeded the New York Police's range of capability. But he just couldn't accept it in his heart. This is New York. This was the territory George Stacy was responsible for guarding. He didn't want these freaks with extraordinary powers running wild in New York. If not restricted, any mutant or superpowered person going crazy in the future would deal a devastating blow to ordinary citizens. How many innocent families would be shattered in the face of these man-made disasters that could be called natural calamities? Director, those annoying DHS people are coming over. Captain Mark reminded him in a low voice. George looked up and saw a middle-aged man in a black suit with a severely receding hairline walking over with a smile. A group of agents in black followed behind him, their aura full of presence. Director George, hello, I am Agent Phil Coulson. This is a direct order from the White House. From now on, the scene will be taken over by S.H.I.E.L.D. Please cooperate with our work. Phil Coulson had his signature professional fake smile on his face. Captain Mark wished he could slap that smiling face. But since the other party was holding the White House's authority, he could only stare helplessly. By the way, you can take away and destroy the Triad's drugs. Those bodies. You can also take away and handle the ones that aren't frozen. Although Phil Coulson's tone was gentle, his attitude was very firm. He knew that when facing local police, he had to show his aura, otherwise these local snakes wouldn't listen. To handle this ice demon incident in Hell's Kitchen, Director Nick Fury had specifically called him, asking him to temporarily set aside the mess over with Tony Stark and come personally. This is Captain Mark. If you need anything, just find him, he will fully cooperate with you. George Stacy reached out his hand lukewarmly. Phil Coulson shook it with moderate strength. George Stacy gave Mark a few brief instructions and then left directly with a dark face. With such a big mess in Hell's Kitchen involving extraordinary powers, his head was about to explode. He still had to go back and prepare how to deal with those media reporters who were like flies. Phil Coulson and Captain Mark exchanged some pleasantries, and then he led his men to begin investigating the scene. Looking at the dense forest of ice sculptures, even though he was wearing a warm suit, Coulson still felt a piercing chill drilling straight into his bones. Was it done by a mutant? Phil Coulson asked in a low voice. Officer, the instruments have not yet detected any energy factors from residual X gene. After dealing with mutants for so many years, S.H.I.E.L.D. had long since mastered a set of black technology specifically for mutants. Since it wasn't a mutant, the suspicion on Iceman, Bobby from the X-Men could be cleared for now. Of course, as a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson had seen too many strange superpowered individuals. Some people's power did not originate from the X gene, but from contact with certain mysterious items or special physical mutations. According to his experience, these wild paths were the most difficult time bombs to control. They were often unscrupulous and extremely destructive to the existing social order. Although S.H.I.E.L.D. had been working on recruiting these people, the results were not ideal. It made sense. Once someone possesses godlike power, who would be willing to be a regulated worker? Such a large-scale freezing ability has an extremely high social hazard rank. Since he came for the Triads, let's dig out Madame Gao first and find out exactly what happened tonight. Coulson pondered for a moment and then turned to instruct the agents around him. Finding Madame Gao was the key to breaking the case. Otherwise, trying to find this elusive ice demon in the vast sea of people would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Also, seal off the scene immediately and strictly forbid any photos from leaking out. Claim to the outside world that it was a large-scale gang war in Hell's Kitchen. Anyway, the outside world's impression of this place is already bad. This excuse should work to some extent. Phil Coulson sighed, feeling weary. Professor, this is all I can do to help you. Just then, a gentle and old voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Mr. Coulson, thank you for your kindness. Coulson's expression remained unchanged as he responded silently in his heart. Professor, if you keep entering people's brains like this, you really won't have any friends. I will find Madame Gao as soon as possible and give you a definite answer. Professor X's voice sounded again. Thank you for your trouble. Please also tell Director Nick that human hostility toward mutants is intensifying lately. I believe he also doesn't want to see a full-scale war break out between humans and mutants. Coulson knew very well the subtext in Professor X's words. If this matter got out and was incited by someone with ulterior motives, the blame would definitely be put on mutants in the end, or even directly on Iceman's head. At that time, even with 100 mouths, Professor X wouldn't be able to clear it up. Professor, we are not enemies. You know SHIELD's stance. Internal strife will only consume our strength to protect the Earth together. Coulson tried to start his lecture mode, but he found that Professor X had already disconnected. This old man. Coulson cursed silently in his heart. Meanwhile, in a luxury office on the top floor of a New York skyscraper, a bald man with a body as massive as a mountain of flesh, wearing a custom extra-large suit, was overlooking the brightly lit city below. It was none other than the famous Wilson Grant Fisk. And behind him stood a man with a bullseye symbol tattooed on his forehead, a toothpick in his mouth, looking at that broad back with a playful gaze. Who would have thought that this philanthropic tycoon of the New York business world was secretly the terrifying underworld emperor, Kingpin? Lester, I never doubt your strength. Kingpin turned around slowly, his fleshy face devoid of any expression, steady as a rock. But you must understand, the appearance of this ice demon has already broken the balance of Hell's Kitchen. The power vacuum left by Madame Gao will surely trigger a frenzy among other gangs, and my business will be severely affected. Kingpin still had half of his words unsaid. Vanessa had left him with the child, and an accident had occurred on the way. Now, he was secretly preparing a crazy plan. In addition to utilizing the triads, Kingpin had also built a secret laboratory deep beneath the underground of Hell's Kitchen. He intended to conduct a quantum collider experiment to forcibly tear open the gates to parallel universes and bring back the Vanessa and child from another world. Mr. Wilson, my bullet did indeed pierce through his head, but it was like passing through air to him. It didn't cause any damage. With so many of Madame Gao's subordinates pointing guns at him, I didn't see him lose a single hair. Bullseye put away his playful grin and spoke with a serious expression. As long as he is human, he has a weakness. Dig him out for me. Cold, killing intent erupted from between Kingpin's teeth. No one had ever dared to threaten him, not even a demon emerging from Hell's Kitchen. Hao Ren slept until he woke up naturally, feeling refreshed and invigorated. He looked up at the alarm clock. Fortunately, it wasn't time for school yet. Humming a little tune, he walked into the bathroom, letting the icy cold water wash over his body. However, his mind was already immersed in the system interface. System, quick, tally up last night's spoils. Let me see how many desire points and wealth points I earned. Hao Ren thought to himself, unable to hide his excitement. Ding! Calculating. Total desire points obtained last night, 3.28 million. Wealth points calculation complete. Total, 34 million. The ones in the stock account hadn't been counted yet. According to the system's temperament, unless Hao Ren cashed out the stocks, the system wouldn't recognize them. Of course, the system also provided a user-friendly option, which was to conduct an asset appraisal settlement at the beginning of each month. But if the stocks fell, the system would unceremoniously deduct the corresponding wealth impairment. Mission settlement. Wool of Vengeance. Mission description. Spread the fires of vengeance throughout Hell's Kitchen, avenge your parents, and destroy the forces of the triads. Mission difficulty rating. White, blue. Congratulations to host Hao Ren. Mission completion is perfect. Obtained 1 blue blind box reward. According to the blind box synthesis formula, 2 blue blind boxes can be synthesized into 1 cyan blind box. Given the host's outstanding performance, the cyan blind box quality is plus 200%, evolving into a red blind box reward. That's it. Just a red box? Hao Ren curled his lip, feeling slightly greedy and unsatisfied. Do you wish to continue with mission rolling accumulation? If continued, the next stage's mission rank will be directly upgraded to a red mission. Hao Ren felt an itch in his heart and really wanted to click yes. But he wasn't stupid. He had caused such a stir last night that he estimated every power in New York was looking for him now. Moreover, his current wealth points and desire points were already a huge sum. Simply using them to increase the development of the ice fruit might hit a bottleneck. Forget it, one must be content. Having it in the bag is what matters. I'll convert this wave of wealth points and desire points into solid combat power first. Once the plan to go long on Stark Industries is finished, I'll be able to rake in an astronomical sum. Then it won't be too late to plan for higher level missions. I need to take the long view and strive for a golden legend, or even try that legendary black blind box that makes people despair. Black represented ominousness and great terror, but in Hao Ren's eyes, it represented ultimate gains and power even more. For enemies, once I can also perfectly complete a mission and harvest the rewards, it will definitely be a nightmare they can't shake off. Precisely because of this, the term black despair was practically a tailor-made synonym for the highest tier blind box. Open the red blind box immediately. A flash of decisiveness crossed Hao Ren's eyes, and his tone was resolute. At this critical juncture, hesitation leads to defeat, while decisiveness allows for free gains. Red blind box opened successfully. This round of rolling lottery has ended. In an instant, Hao Ren's vision was completely filled by an eerie and seductive crimson light. That red light was so piercing that it even caused him a momentary trance. Congratulations, host. You have successfully drawn the exclusive skill of Mara from the DC Universe. Water Control Magic, current level, proficient. Listening to the cold system prompt in his mind, Hao Ren smacked his lips, feeling a bit of a gap in his expectations. To be honest, deep down, he yearned more for those simple and crude passive skills that could directly max out physical strength or provide infinite stamina. If there's really no other way, in the end, I can only set my sights on that vial of super serum in the hands of the military. Hao Ren let out a light sigh, his brow tinged with a hint of helplessness. But on second thought, if Mara's water control methods were combined with his original freezing ability, it might produce a qualitative change. Thinking about it carefully, this skill was actually quite top tier. For him at this stage, being able to freely manipulate moisture was simply the best support for developing the ice fruit to its limit. Does the host confirm to load water control magic immediately? The system's inquiry sounded again. Learn it. You can never have too many skills. Having thought through the logic, Hao Ren no longer hesitated and moved his mind. Congratulations. Water control magic, proficient level, loading complete. With a boom, complex and obscure magical knowledge poured into Hao Ren's brain like a bursting river. Simultaneously, a numb warm current surged through his entire body, and a mysterious, indescribable energy seemed to have been added to his form. Controlling water meant that within the ocean, he was the uncrowned king. With a slight thought from Hao Ren, the cold water droplets originally showering him seemed to come to life. They were gently lifted by an invisible hand, obediently bypassing his skin. He could even clearly hear the joyful sounds of the water current. This blood-linked sense of intimacy made it feel as if this wasn't an external skill, but an innate talent he was born with. He quickly pulled up his attribute panel and took a glance. Name: Hao Ren. Wealth points, 517.75 million. Meaning you can become stronger by spending money. Desire points, 5.62 million, used to break through realm bottlenecks. Ability list: Ice fruit, control first stage plus, mind immunity, passive max plus, water control magic, proficient level plus. Combat skills: Baji Mizong Fist, transcendent grandmaster plus. Current mission chain: 1. Ichisawa Kaori, long-term. When facing female heroes with special identities, if you can have some deep communication with them that transcends friendship, the rewards will be beyond your imagination. Reward: Blue blind box, stackable, attribute. Independent side branch, infinite loop mission. With the frantic accumulation of desire points, at this moment, the tempting, plus, sign behind his various abilities and skills appeared exceptionally dazzling. This meant that as long as Hao Ren was willing to throw down massive amounts of desire points, those abilities that seemingly had reached their ceiling could still be forcibly pushed past their limits. However, Hao Ren forcibly suppressed the urge to add points to the ice fruit at this time. The second stage of a devil fruit was undoubtedly the legendary awakening. He was very worried that if he broke through in such a densely populated downtown area, the cold air erupting at the moment of awakening might instantly turn the entire center of New York City into a silent ice age. New York was a global focal point, an international metropolis. If he really caused this kind of world-ending disaster, let alone not being able to stay in the USA, he estimated that over 200 countries worldwide would join forces to issue a wanted warrant, leaving him with nowhere to settle. Aside from fleeing into outer space, he would have no way out. But Earth's current technology tree hadn't reached the step of interstellar migration yet. Even if he wanted to be a space wanderer, there was no spaceship to send him up. System, smash the water control magic up to control level for me. Confirm consuming 30 million wealth points to advance water control magic to control level? 30 million? Hao Ren was stunned for a moment, then his lips curled up wildly. This system had always been a case of getting what you pay for. The greater the consumption, the more terrifying the magnitude of the improvement. The original Mara was only at the proficient level. If he could smash it up to the control level, its power would definitely be able to grind the original version into the dirt. It seemed the potential and upper limit of the items from this red blind box far exceeded expectations. Payment confirmed. Hao Ren did not hesitate in the slightest. 30 million wealth points deducted. Water control magic is evolving. Control level reached. In an instant, Hao Ren felt the magic power within him surge dozens of times over, like a volcanic eruption. Now, he could even precisely control the flow and direction of every drop of blood in his own body. The tiny, free-floating water molecules in the air now seemed to have become countless tentacles extending from him, allowing him to have everything happening around him under his complete control. This was the power of the control level. There was absolutely no need to chant or charge up like a mage. With a single thought, the magic was cast, and all waters submitted. Too strong, this power was not even inferior to his signature freezing ability. Looking at the panel again, wealth points had shrunk to 487.75 million, and desire points were still at 5.62 million. The water control magic in the ability column had changed to Control Plus. This indicated that the potential hadn't been exhausted yet. As long as there were enough desire points, he could continue to stack it higher. But he glanced at the requirement to break through to the next stage and suddenly felt a toothache. It actually required 5 million desire points. A passive like mind immunity required 3 million. The breakthrough for 8 Extremes Fist also started at 3 million. Hao Ren originally felt he was quite wealthy, but looking at it now, after laboriously saving over 3 million, he was still a pauper. Forget it, no use thinking about these upsetting things, time for school. If I don't head to school now, I bet that little girl Gwen Stacy is going to start nagging again. I wonder if this blonde little beauty will hide the truth from her old classmate after she mutates into Spider-Woman? Hao Ren expressed that he was very much looking forward to it. Apartment basement level 2. Hao Ren sat in the driver's seat, his fingers lightly tapping on the steering wheel. His phone vibrated. A text message indicated that Gwen had already come downstairs. A moment later, the car door opened, and Gwen sat inside. Hao Ren didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he turned his head and stared straight at her face for a long while. This burning gaze made Gwen feel uneasy, as if she were being seen right through. What's wrong? Is there a flower growing on my face? Gwen Stacy subconsciously touched her cheek and flusteredly pulled out a small mirror to check herself over. Fortunately, there were no strange bristles or compound eyes. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed the spider mutation hadn't affected her beauty. It's nothing, I just feel like your skin is glowing today, it looks finer than before. Hao Ren gave a light chuckle before starting the engine and driving toward the school. Gwen's heart suddenly leapt into her throat. She looked in the mirror carefully again, her fingers unconsciously stroking her cheek. Thinking about the amazing changes that had happened to her body recently, Gwen suddenly realized that she might not be able to hitch a ride in Hao Ren's car so guilt-free in the future. She stole a glance at Hao Ren out of the corner of her eye as he drove. His profile, as resolute as if carved by a knife, actually looked heart-flutteringly handsome under the morning light. Gwen Stacy felt her heart skip a beat for no reason. He's really good looking, excellent grades, a steady personality, and his looks are so top tier. Was I blind before, to actually ignore such a premium treasure boy hidden right next to me? Student Gwen, if you keep staring at me like that, I'm going to misunderstand and think you have improper thoughts about me. Hao Ren looked straight ahead and suddenly spoke up teasingly. Gwen's porcelain white face instantly turned red, like a ripe honey peach. Hao Ren, have you found a date for the graduation prom yet? Gwen Stacy quickly changed the subject, her azure, gem-like eyes shimmering with the light of anticipation. I'm a bit clumsy, I don't know how to dance. Hao Ren answered cleanly and decisively, not giving her any face at all. Gwen Stacy's eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected this reason. But on second thought, considering Hao Ren's background as an orphan, a wave of heartache and pity welled up in her heart. It's okay, I can be your teacher. Gwen felt her words were too eager and quickly tried to cover it up. I mean, if you find a date, I can teach you a few moves in advance to make sure you don't embarrass yourself at the prom. The corners of Hao Ren's mouth curled into a nice arc. The graduation prom is a major life event. Of course I don't want to miss it. Unfortunately, I don't know many girls at school. Counting them up, I'm only really familiar with Hannah and you. Hearing this, Gwen Stacy felt a secret joy in her heart. That girl Hannah didn't pose a threat at all. However, Hao Ren's tone shifted. But Hannah told me that the cheerleading captain Julia is quite interested in me and even encouraged me to try inviting her. Gwen Stacy's mood instantly plummeted from the clouds to the bottom of a valley. Julia? That social butterfly who likes to collect people of every race from around the globe? That woman plays around a lot, the whole school knows it. Then you. What are you thinking? Gwen asked tentatively, a trace of imperceptible nervousness hidden in her voice. Julia is a celebrity at our Star City High School, the dream girl of many boys. But as far as I know, Harry Osborn has already beaten everyone to it, and Julia agreed to be his date. Hao Ren's tone was flat, without a hint of regret. Gwen Stacy's hanging heart finally settled back into her chest. So, you plan to go to the prom all by yourself? That would be a lifelong regret? Gwen Stacy had already made up her mind. The moment Hao Ren spoke up, she would immediately agree. You should know, this young miss is a future superhero. You should be secretly laughing for being able to invite me as your date. What about you then, the grade school beauty Gwen? Hao Ren countered. Gwen Stacy was slightly startled, then proudly raised her chin. Fletcher, Peter, Harry, Jackson. They're all lining up to invite me, but I haven't agreed to any of them. After saying that, she looked at Hao Ren with a look full of suggestive meaning. If Hao Ren still played dumb at this point, then he was destined to be alone for the rest of his life. It seems the heavens are still looking out for me. Hao Ren laughed loudly, turning his head during a red light to look at the girl in the passenger seat with sincere eyes. Then, noble Miss Gwen, would you be willing to condescend to be my date for the graduation prom? Drive properly. Gwen gave him a look, but the corners of her mouth couldn't stop turning up. Her heart felt so sweet. Although Hao Ren was looking ahead, his senses were already different from before. The streets were busy with traffic and noise, but under the perception of water control magic, the flow of moisture within all living things around him was clearly visible. This all-around sensory feedback was 100 times sharper than simple vision. Seeing as you're so sincere, this young miss will reluctantly agree to you. Gwen Stacy gave a haughty hum. For real? Truer than gold? Since settling the matter of being prom dates, the relationship between the two had progressed rapidly like a rocket. The barrier that once stood between them vanished into thin air amidst the ambiguous atmosphere. Hao Ren had been in a great mood these past 2 days, walking with a spring in his step. Gwen also ran over to his house whenever she had nothing to do, under the pretext of exchanging feelings. The only regret was that this girl never invited Hao Ren to her house as a guest. Meanwhile, the legend of the ice demon in Hell's Kitchen finally exploded completely. But the identity exposure crisis that Hao Ren worried about did not occur. It seemed he was not only clean in his work but also had good luck. Hao Ren sent a few messages to Jessica, but they were like stones sinking into the ocean. Clearly, after that night of drunken indulgence, this woman chose to act like an ostrich and hide from people. I was a bit hasty when choosing the apartment before. I basically tied my own hands. Hao Ren muttered to himself. He wanted to play the game of having a foot in 2 boats, but a spider woman lived next door. If he brought other women back in the future, with Gwen's freakish spider sense, she could listen to a live broadcast of any movement next door. Julia, help me look for a new house. Just 3 requirements. Good privacy, must have mountains and water, and it doesn't matter if it's far from the city. Hao Ren dialed his real estate agent. This Julia was not the other Julia. This was a charming mature woman agent, She was the one who handled this apartment originally. Hao Ren remembered very clearly the soul-stirring look this woman gave him before she left last time. His body, in its peak puberty, was overflowing with hormones. To suppress the fire, he had frequently turned himself into ice recently to cool down. Of course, buying this house wasn't entirely for those trivial matters. He mainly wanted to find an absolutely safe place to store the huge amount of cash he got from his $0 shopping. Furthermore, the subprime mortgage crisis was still raging, and housing prices were at a golden opportunity for bottom fishing where even their own mothers wouldn't recognize them. If not now, when? Weekend. Gwen went to the Osborne Group for an internship. Hao Ren glanced at his stock account. Stark Industries' stock price was hitting rock bottom and rebounding. But this bit of money was just a number to him. It wasn't harvest season yet. Tony Stark hadn't been back for long, and that bald villain Stain was probably about to be unable to hold back from taking action. Hao Ren drove following the navigation all the way east, heading straight for the wealthy area of Long Island. In this financial tsunami, many manor owners on the East Coast lost everything down to their underwear. It was a good time to pick up bargains. The car drove into a quiet, tree-lined avenue, and Hao Ren saw a graceful figure standing by a Ford car from a distance. The white shirt was stretched tight, and the hip-hugging skirt outlined an amazing curve. It was the voluptuous real estate agent, Julia. "Mr. Hao, you're very punctual." Julia, in her early 30s, was at the age where a woman is most flavorful. But these past few days, she had been living in dire straits. Her husband's investment failure left them with a pile of debt, and the company was going through a wave of layoffs. If she didn't close another deal, she would have to pack up and leave, and her 2 children in school probably wouldn't even be able to afford tuition. "Miss Julia, it's been a long time." Hao Ren got out of the car and opened his arms with a smile. Julia emitted an inviting fragrance like a mature peach. To her, the current Hao Ren was like a living bodhisattva saving her from suffering. If not for the commission from that last apartment deal saving her in an emergency, she wouldn't have been able to hold on long ago. Moreover, the divorce papers were already signed. She urgently needed money now. Although their embrace was ceremonial, Hao Ren held her very tightly, the fire in his body becoming a bit hard to suppress. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.